I have a 10 o'clock.
You're gonna be tight.
Yeah.
It's 2:00.
I brought.
Call the meeting to order.
But that's what now.
Please stand for the pledge of allegiance. Director Civilian.
I can. Please join me in honoring our flag. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America. And to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice.
So, here's the pledge, we're gonna do, public forum, public testimony is permitted only on matters listed on the posted agenda. You have 5 minutes.
Jimmy,
You want me to start?
yeah.
Oh, okay. I really thought I was gonna have time to go over my, where do I go?
I'm not saying.
No, my name is Joyce Kristen. I live in, up of Van Dusen in Big Bear City. And I grew up watching, I used to swim in the river that used to be there. As a matter of fact, my brother almost drowned there. And so our watershed has been taken from us. And we need to replenish our watershed. So I have a new proposal. I'm actually, going along with CDC. It's called Project Big Bear Watershed. And the watershed project is a channel. I've already figured out, talked to a few people, we can actually go right up Van Dusen, right up the road with a channel that takes water up, back up to the watershed. And every area has to have their own watershed refilling project. And that is true sustainability and true replenishing. Big Bear Lake is not gonna get our water. Big Bear City, this is our water, and it's gonna stay in Big Bear City. If we are required by the state, I've come up with a plan to keep our water. I wanna know, I'd like to know who is elected officials here. Okay, so elected officials, you are bound to the Constitution and to the Republic. And as a republic, I have rights, not corporate rights, not sacramental rights, local rights. And it's our water, and we're not gonna give away our water rights. We're not gonna give away our water rights. I hope you understand, this project is a no. Thank you.
John,
Good afternoon, my name is Joe Sillick. I'm a resident of Ponskin. Been a resident in the valley for about 30 years. Spent 14 years with the city as a consulting civil engineer, still civil engineer. I'm currently on the water board for the city of Big Bear Lake. And the Replenish Big Bear Lake project is important for the entire valley. It is a valley-wide project. It benefits everyone. And I know there's been a lot of hard work that's been put forward to bring it to this point. And you were at the 10-yard line. We just need to push it over the goal line, finish it off. It will benefit everybody in the valley. It's not focused to benefit any one particular group in the valley, but everybody in the valley. And as I mentioned, a lot of hard work has been put forward on this project, and we need to see it to completion for the benefit of all the valley. And we need to turn down the noise from the few people that are very vocal against it, and look what's for the benefit of the entire valley. That's what I'm here to support. Myself, my fellow supporters in Ponskin, that we want to see this project move forward. Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Ted Trentman. I'm with Big Bear Television. You probably haven't heard of it before, but we are on your Roku device and your Amazon Fire Stick. I'm here today to support Replenish Big Bear. I was here the other day and mentioned, imagine this group of people over 150 years ago, sitting in a room talking about building a dam. I mean, how exciting that would be if we could jump back in time, know how many things are different from today to back then. What I'm proud to be a part of is a community that's thinking forward. When I think of Replenish Big Bear, I'm thinking about not of today, but 150 years from now, when this project is expanding into Irwin Lake, into Baldwin Lake in ways that we can't even imagine today. I mean, just imagine when they thought about building a dam. They had no idea that the waters would flood hundreds of acres and that we would be sitting here today talking about how to keep water in the valley. So I just want to urge you today to remember the importance not only of this moment, but of the future, of the generations that are to come. Also the animals and how important they are to the community and how we've even kind of invaded their forest and how they're going to be looking for water as well, the birds and the bears. We're not the only inhabitants of this area, and we have a responsibility that goes far beyond our own needs. So I'm here today to support this project, and I understand when things, I've invented many things in my life, and things often cost more the longer you wait to finish them. So I'm excited to see this progress quickly come together. And I understand community concerns that things cost a lot of money, but even the dam ended up costing almost twice as much as they originally proposed.
John?
Well, good afternoon. I'm John Saunders, and I live in Big Bear City, and I own Captain John's Lawn Hardwood and Lead in Spotsy. And back in the early 80s, I don't know if you know this or not, but the Big Bear Municipal Water District Board of Directors came up with this plan to replenish Big Bear way back then. And I've been watching it progress along and not get very far over the years. And I've seen some dramatic changes in the original plan that we came up with years and years ago. And the original plan that we came up with was to take the water up as high as we could in the valley, all the way up, including Lake Williams and the canyons all along the top of the ridge, and let it trickle down into the groundwater and eventually refill the groundwater and then come down and run into Big Bear Lake. But now the plan is to go directly to the lake, but I don't think that's a very good idea, because the people of Big Bear City are mostly the people that live here full time. And Big Bear City, Baldwin Lake, Grove Lake, Lake Williams, everybody in the area should benefit from this plan. And that's the way the plan was initially set up, was to take the water, distribute it everywhere up above, and let it run down and eventually get into the lake. And a lot of the local people in Big Bear need to have some things explained to them that it's going to take years to fill everything up. When it does fill up, the lake is going to spill and will continue to spill. And that water that we spill out of Big Bear Lake is very valuable to the agencies down below, including Bear Valley Mutual Water Company, San Bernardino Valley, the City of Redlands. Everybody will benefit from this project in the end. So I'm very much still for the project, but we need to include Big Bear City and everybody else on the east end, as well as just the people around the lake and the people that benefit from it. Thank you.
Is there anybody else that would like to speak? Seeing none, we'll move on. No old business. We're gonna move on to new business. And the discussion item is 5A, replenish Big Bear general discussion. And just to, I guess Lane's gonna take the accomplishments, but in your packet, there's a list of accomplishments, and Lane can kind of just go through all the accomplishments that we have over the last Since the beginning of the project.
Yeah, sounds good. My name is Lane Carlson. I'm the program manager for Replenish Big Bear. So the project team put together this list of accomplishments that's in your handout here. I'm not going to read all of them. It's a pretty long list. But it starts, it's categorized, so it starts with project development, which for this iteration of the project began in 2015, and the first study was completed in 2016. And then in 2018 was updated to include the concept that we're currently referring to as Replenish Big Bear. And then there's a list of funding and financing accomplishments and milestones to date the program has received. I think officially around 17 million.
18 million.
$18 million in grants, we just heard about a new one, and there's another 9 million in outstanding applications. As of today, we expect to hear back on that in May. The next section here is public outreach, and there's actually about 4 pages that outline 4 pages. There we go. That outline the various public outreach efforts that have been undertaken since the beginning of the project, really, dating back to 2019. There's a lot of different venues, community presentations, newspaper, community groups, things like that. Stakeholder coordination section outlines meetings we've had with both local stakeholder agencies here in the Valley, as well as downstream stakeholders, both in the Lucerne Valley and the San Bernardino Valley, discussing aspects of the program. There's a section that outlines all of our board and committee meetings that have been conducted throughout that time. So there's been a couple of all board meetings, and then, of course, many of the borough board meetings. And there's a separate attachment that outlines all of the CEQA and NEPA milestones, and we'll talk about that in more detail in the next item. And then a regulatory section that outlines all of the meetings that we've had with the 2 primary regulatory bodies, the Regional Board and the Division of Drinking Water, discussing, program requirements, permitting requirements, and application. Preliminary engineering, and then there's a list of contracts and agreements that Barbara has entered into so far. So, as I said, it's a pretty long list here. We're happy to answer any questions about any specific items. David, is there anything else you'd like to specifically cover in here?
No, obviously, you just got this list, so if either of you have any questions about any part of the list, you're more than welcome to get in contact with me, and I can go into more detail on each of the items. But obviously, it's a very extensive list of what the major milestones in the project. Obviously, there's been a lot of work and effort put in throughout the whole process. And then, of course, there has been, of course, the milestones on the EIR has also been included. And we're going to actually go through the EIR in more depth after a few minutes. I think we have our next thing on there was the advisory vote. There was a question about advisory vote. And so we have, there's Jim Priest. Yeah. Jim Priest is here from DB&K, and we wanted to give the committee an opportunity to ask any questions about the advisory committee, or yeah, maybe Jim, you could explain the process of the advisory vote and how that would work, or if it could work, or all those kind of people.
Certainly, thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Jim Priest, Best and Krieger. Yes, an advisory measure is typically put on the ballot the same way a binding measure would be put on. Unlike a binding measure, there is no ordinance or resolution. There's no substantive language that's being put to the voters. You're basically asking a question of the voter. So in effect, it's just, how do the voters feel about a 75-word ballot question expressed as a concept? You would put it on by an election resolution, like I said, the same way you would with a binding measure. We would have to get it to San Bernardino County no later than August 9th. That would be the drop dead deadline, 88 days before the election. And other than that, it would just require borrow board action to put that on under the elections code. Now, the one issue that I see, and it's something I do have a call into the registrar of voters for San Bernardino County, is just how we would manage the logistics. Presumably, the question would be put to the voters in the city of Big Bear Lake, the CSD area, and County Service Area 53, and any other territories that are within BARWA's jurisdiction. This is not an entirely unprecedented situation. Back in 1976, BARWA did put a revenue bond measure on the ballot, and that ballot was a binding measure, and that did go to those three populations of voters, and it was approved at that time. I don't believe this is going to be such an exotic proposal that it would be beyond the county's ability to accommodate this, but it was something I had advised staff earlier that we should run by the county just to make sure that the logistics would work out. But assuming the logistics can be worked out, and I'm optimistic they could be, then it would require BARWA board action to adopt a resolution that would put that non-binding advisory question on the ballot. The other issue that I see is cost. I do not have an estimate at this time for San Bernardino County. Again, I'm waiting to hear back from them on this, on what it would cost BARWA to put an advisory measure on the ballot. I can tell you that I did have a few clients who put ballot measures on for the March 5th election in San Bernardino County, and it was $80,000 a measure. Now, I believe that cost will go down for the November election because there's just more things on the ballot, more spreading of the costs among the public agencies for the total cost of the election. So I think it would be something less than that, but I don't have an estimate or a precise number that I can give you at this time. But, you know, realistically, it probably would be somewhere 5-figure range, lower than 80,000, but I think it would be at least probably $10,000–$20,000 to put an advisory measure on the ballot. You know, we could write up the language. Our firm could certainly do that, so that would not be an impediment. What I can also do is propose an alternative. Is that, Bridget, is that something you'd like me to discuss right now as a possible alternative? I don't mean to be flip in saying this, please don't take it that way, but an advisory measure is fundamentally a public opinion poll. It's non-binding. So you're basically just asking your voters, you know, how do you believe about this particular issue? If a majority think yes, that doesn't have any legal significance. Again, there's no binding measure to be approved. If a majority say no, again, it's non-binding. Nothing passed or failed in that respect. It is purely an advisory question. So an alternative that I have sometimes suggested to clients is actually do a public opinion poll. You can retain a polling survey company. I did reach out to some of my colleagues. I have not heard back from them yet as to cost or time frame, but I suspect it would probably be less expensive, and you would probably get results sooner from a public opinion poll than putting advisory measure on the November 5th ballot. Again, I can't speak to cost right now. I can advise staff later when I get that information. But what I can tell you is I'm quite certain they would be able to perform a public opinion poll of, you know, perhaps a couple thousand voters, 2,500 voters, something that would clearly be statistically significant to give BARWA a sense of the voter sentiments there. And I'm quite confident they'd be able to turn around those results far sooner than the November 5th election. So again, that's an alternative for the board to consider today. But you know, that's basically how advisory measures work, and the alternative would be a public opinion poll. Dave, Bridget, was there anything else you'd like me to address right now? Otherwise, I'm happy to respond to any questions.
No, I think that covers it.
Okay.
Some questions?
I have a question. What would the difference be then if it's going on the ballot? Is it harder to get it on the ballot as a binding vote?
Well, that would be something, again, I would have to explore with the county. The only precedent we've had so far in Barwa's case was a revenue bond where there was clear statutory authority under the 1941 revenue bond law. And that was a voter approval that bound Barwa as a separate agency to issuing revenue bonds and securing those bonds with revenue. It did not tap the finances or impose obligations on the member agencies. If Barwa were to put a binding measure on that, again, bound Barwa as an agency, that may be feasible. Again, it would depend on the nature of the measure. But I question whether such a measure would bind the member agencies to Barwa's commitments. I think in those cases, to bind the city to a commitment, to bind the CSD to the commitment, or to bind the county, those would probably have to be measures that go to their particular voters for their particular measures. So that gets a little bit challenging.
What I'm hearing from people is because of the price tag of this, they think that it's going to come to a vote like a bond. So would like the city of Big Bear Lake have to do something? And then CSD would have to do something? I think people feel like because of the price tag, they should be able to vote on it.
Mm-hmm. The only two instances legally I'm aware of where JPAs have done binding measures. Again, the first example was the revenue bond law of 1941. Again, that was a Barwa bond secured by the revenues of Barwa. It was not secured by the credit or the finances of the member agencies. The only other JPA example I'm aware of is the Big Bear Fire Authority. They put on a CFD, a Community Facilities District special tax back in 2020, required 2/3 voter approval. It did not pass. There might be, and I just emphasize maybe, we'd have to work out the logistics, but there may be a legal way for Barwa to do a CFD special tax on all of the properties within the Barwa jurisdiction. And that might be binding in effect because all properties within the Barwa jurisdiction would be paying a special tax to finance this project.
Would that be considered a Mello-Roos?
I'm sorry?
Would that be considered a Mello-Roos?
Yes, the Mello-Roos Community Facilities District Act. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that would require 2/3 voter approval. Generally, and again, I can't speak for your particular circumstances, but generally, Mello-Roos district elections tend not to have a very high success rate, just being frank with you. Most Mello-Roos community facilities districts are formed at the time of development because there's a much simpler process there. There's one developer that owns all of the property, and that developer, being the sole voter, so to speak, is able to sign off some consents, cast literally one ballot and say, yeah, we agree to be a community facilities district or annexed into an existing community facilities district. And then those taxes will be paid at some later time by those who buy the houses or buy the properties within that development. That's typically how it's done because, you know, the current owner developer isn't going to pay those taxes. And so it's an easier lift to get that approval. Community facilities district votes for properties that are already occupied with residents, so you're actually going to a resident election, tend not to have the best track record. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it is a pretty high standard. It's 2/3 voter approval and, you know, not the best record, just to be honest with you.
Can we talk real quick about how a binding measure would work if we need a 4/5 vote to move forward on some of the items for Replenish? Because we have 2 board members from the city, 2 from CSD, and 1 from the county.
Mhm.
How would that work?
With an advisory measure, I think just simple majority of the borrower board could put that on. Now the question becomes, and again, I'm not familiar with this. I don't know if your JPA agreement requires some higher standard to adopt a resolution to put a measure on. I would have to defer to you or your general counsel on that. Under the elections code, a simple majority of the legislative body can put an advisory measure on the ballot. I'm not aware of any supermajority requirement for a CFD tax, a Mello-Roos district. But there are additional procedures that have to go into effect there. You have to have a notice public hearing. There has to be a resolution of attention adopted. There's actually a majority protest process that you go through before you put it on the ballot. So there's a number of hoops that need to be jumped through under the Mello-Roos Act before you actually put that on the ballot. But off the top of my head, I'm not aware that in the CFD law and not in the elections code, there is not a supermajority requirement of the board. But again, perhaps your JPA agreement provides for something different, and I'm just not aware of what that might be.
So would that mean borrow would specifically put a property tax, they would put it on the property taxes, that's borrow would do that specifically?
The Mello-Roos Act allows joint powers, and again, there's very little legal authority for joint powers authorities to put binding revenue measures on the ballot, but Mello-Roos Community Facilities District, that is one. There it is allowed by statute. The Big Bear Fire Authority is a joint powers authority, and they used the Mello-Roos Act back in 2020 to put their measure on. So you would use a similar law, or the same law, a similar process, to put a Mello-Roos district tax on the ballot. If passed, it would be binding. The properties within that, within Barwa's district would have to pay the special tax. It would be collected just like property taxes and then remitted through the county, ultimately to Barwa, and then used for the project. But again, there's a lot of steps there. We'd have to, work that out and ramp that up to eventually put that on the ballot.
And just, forgive me, but one of the questions that I would have is O&M something you can cover underneath that tax as well?
Community facilities districts can be used for facilities and for services. I don't profess to be the firm's expert on CFD taxes, but my understanding is yes, you can do O&M on facilities as well as payment for capital acquisition, construction of facilities.
Jim, I had a question. You continue when you're talking about Mello-Roos type measures. You talk about parcels, and typically our elections, it's the primary resident of the people that are allowed to vote. On a Mello-Roos type measure, is it all the property owners or just the ones that's their primary residence?
The issue there is it's typically the property owners that would vote, but again, you're putting it to an election. So if you have absentee I'd have to look into that a little bit further on how that shakes out with the CFD election. These are pretty rare, so I don't deal with them very often. My understanding is, it's generally directed at the property owner. However, it is a resident election. And if you're not registered to vote up in that area, say you're an absentee owner, I'm not certain that you get a ballot. But again, that's something we'd have to look into more carefully.
I just don't know, because they're voting on something and that person, even though it's not their primary residence, are gonna have to pay if it passes. So I don't know if there's different rules for that type of, measure.
I'll try to look that up while we're talking here and see if I can get you a clear answer to that.
I appreciate it.
That was one of the things the board in the past did bring up, was the fact that it, in the past, you know, and Jim's gonna confirm that, but in the past, it was that issue where only the residents up here would get to vote, so, you know, the 2/3 of the people that don't live there on a full-time basis in the city of Big Bear Lake would not be able to vote on that and would have that tax applied to them, and then they wouldn't have an opportunity to vote on that. That was, you know, that was one of the discussions in the past, back, I think it was 22, when we had the original meeting, August of 22. The other issue is, you know, we're not in the business of foreclosing on properties if they don't pay these fees, and that would be one of the other issues that, the board at the time didn't want to get involved with, is because it does include the ability to do that. So that was, you know, those are the, if I remember, you
Well,
Sure.
Jim can speak to the foreclosure language.
yeah, maybe Jim, do you want to speak to that foreclosure part?
Yeah, I'll be honest with you. I wasn't prepared for a detailed discussion of CFD taxes here. My understanding is that CFD taxes are collected like property taxes. And so generally it would be the county enforcing that rather than Barwa enforcing that. And, you know, again, that's my understanding of how delinquencies and CFD taxes are paid, just like delinquencies in any other property tax payment.
While we're, do you guys have any more questions? Yeah, okay.
You mentioned CSD and City of Big Bear Lake. Is there any reason that OneSkin as the other fifth board member would be excluded or prohibited from participating?
Is Fawnskin part of County Service Area 53, or is that in a separate area within the Barwood jurisdiction?
It's 53B, yes.
Okay. Any Barwa measure, binding or advisory, again, the available law on the topic, and again, I would confirm this with the registrar of voters for the logistics, is that the question, however that may be, advisory or binding, would go to the voters in County Service Area 53, as well as the CSD and the City of Big Bear Lake, because that is the Barwood jurisdiction. So Fawnskin would be entitled to a vote as part of County Service Area 53.
Now, since we cover the entire valley, would that be an issue at all? The fact that there are areas in Baldwin Lake and technically in our service area, even though we don't service them, would any of that have any kind of issue?
The available law that we have on this, and again, this is a little bit different in that it's a JPA wide election, so there's only those two instances of binding measures out there, but the available law indicates that it is the voters within your legal boundaries, your legal jurisdiction. The fact that this may have impacts on folks outside of your legal jurisdiction does not entitle them to a ballot on that.
Well, actually, so our jurisdiction actually is the entire valley, so our borders, if I remember correctly, include areas that are not serviced by, they don't have service right now. They're still on septic and all those other things, but they are technically in our service area, our service boundaries.
Okay.
So we'd have to try and exclude them. I don't know how that would work to try and exclude them, even though technically and they are in our service boundaries.
Mhm.
Right?
Doing some quick research here in the Mello-Roos Act, it appears that these would be ballots sent to the qualified electors of the proposed community facilities district. So if this was going to be a Barwa-wide community facilities district, it's not based on land ownership. It's based on being a qualified elector. And under the elections code, a qualified elector is someone who is a resident and registered voter within that jurisdiction. So that that answers the earlier question we talked about. And what it also does is if you have qualified electors, resident registered voters within your service area, they would, my read of it is they would be entitled to vote whether they currently receive sewer or wastewater service from Barwa or not. If they are within your legal jurisdiction and they are resident registered voters, they'd be entitled to a vote.
Does that mean they would actually be paying the fee too, even though there's no service to them?
They would be paying the special tax. Now, there may be, with community facilities districts, there are ways to craft it where the boundaries may not be coterminous with Barwa. Cities, counties, other agencies will oftentimes form a community facilities district that's not covering the entire city or covering the entire county. It covers a discrete boundary area. So there may be ways here to craft a CFD that excludes those properties and those voters who are not receiving service, who are still on septic, et cetera. Again, this would all be how we, how the CFD boundaries are crafted there. So there would be some, there'd be some work involved in coming up with that. And then by the time the board got to the resolution of intention, which is really the kickoff process to start this, we would be defining the boundaries of the proposed CFD, having the hearing, seeing if there's a majority protest. If there isn't, then it would proceed to an election. And then the election would be limited to those resident registered voters within the boundaries of the proposed district. So if you exclude certain people from it, they would not get a vote, but they would not be subject to the special tax either.
All right. Thank you, Jim. All right, then we'll move on to the EIR overview, and this would be, we have Caitlin Dotson Hamilton from Tom Dotson and Associates here.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for me. So I think we're kind of here to talk about the mitigation measures. I know Lane sort of went over all the progress that we've had as a team to get to this point of where we have an EIR that's nearly ready for certification or for consideration of certification by the board. Some of those milestones were essentially required us to rethink how we approach the project, resulted in meetings with other stakeholders, including, as Lane said, downstream stakeholders in Lucerne Valley and in City of Redlands and East Valley Water District, which I think overall created a layer of communication that will help the program move forward. And just, there were a lot of changes. This project has evolved over time, but the main thing we're here to go over are the mitigation measures. So I'm gonna begin with that, starting with aesthetics and what we're kind of mitigating for. As you guys know, there's facilities all throughout the valley. Most of them are not facilities that have any sort of major height associated with them. If you're thinking about pipelines and the solar evaporation ponds are going to be at or below grade, essentially invisible to the naked eye, especially for pipelines. So there are mitigation measures to sort of protect the scenic vistas in the valley to ensure that landscaping is, consistent with the local jurisdiction's requirements, because Barwood and all the other agencies are not necessarily required to comply with those laws, because they're water facilities. That's one of the laws that doesn't apply to, water projects or wastewater projects. One of the questions I think the board had asked was about tree removal and, reforestation. And there is a mitigation measure, there are actually two that are applicable to tree removal. But for the most part, this project is going through areas where trees wouldn't be impacted. We don't know where the Sand Canyon monitoring wells are gonna go. So we kind of have to create a little bit of protection in case there happen to be a tree removal need on one of those sites, when those projects are actually considered and designed, at a greater detail than they are now. The biggest consideration for trees is really that there's a private property in, that the Sand Canyon pipeline must go through. And unless, BDLDWP considers a different alignment, but that area has trees on it. And, in order to comply with the, city's code, there's a mitigation measure that applies to that. But there's also a mitigation measure that's a little confusing that's required to comply with, CAL FIRE regulations. And I've worked with this on a number of projects, one of them being the, Maple Hill Fields complex, that's being considered by the school district, and CAL FIRE considers all trees that are kind of on these like wide properties to be timber, whether they can be commercially harvested or not. And so you have to comply with these, regulations that are called, make sure I have the correct language here. It's like a timber harvest permit and a timber conversion plan. And the nice thing about this particular issue is that if this project does have to go through that small area, it's less than 3 acres, so there's an exemption available to the project, which requires less time dedicated to actually obtaining the exemption. So obviously trees are an important resource, forestry is an important resource in the valley. So those are all being mitigated for in both the aesthetics section of the EIR and the agriculture and forestry part of the EIR. And for aesthetics specifically, all of the impacts were mitigated to a level of less than significant. So effectively, the very minor mitigations that are in here will protect views, rock outcroppings, trees, and light pollution. Moving on to agriculture and forestry resources, we did identify a significant impact in this particular area. Nothing related to what's going on up here in the valley, but because Barwa owns the Lucerne Valley site, that area is currently has about 190 acres of potential farming area. And this project would reduce the amount of discharge that goes to that site, which would create less area that could be farmed. And therefore, we have to identify that loss of prime farmland or farmland of statewide importance as a significant impact. In regards to forestry resources, those were effectively mitigated through complying with CAL FIRE's existing regulations, which is a mitigation measure, but those regulations would apply to the project kind of regardless. Moving on to air quality. Air quality, there was not a significant impact identified, which is important because we worked really hard with our air quality and greenhouse gas modeling teams to sort of figure out the real emissions that could be generated by the project. That took a lot of time and effort to really collaborate with WSC and the modeling team at Urban Crossroads to figure that out and get the NOx emissions, which is nitrous oxide emissions, to below South Coast Air Quality Management District's thresholds. So there's one mitigation measure that requires Tier 4 equipment to be used for everything except well drilling. Effectively, well drilling is not, there's no easy way to drill the monitoring wells with tier 4 equipment, so that's exempt. Even with that, tier 4 is pretty common these days for public agencies. It's almost a given that it's gonna be required. So it's not earth-shatteringly expensive or anything like that, compared to the normal equipment that would be utilized. And then the other air quality mitigation measure that we, the other two were related to potential odors from the brine evaporation ponds. You know, there's a lot of speculative data on whether the evaporation ponds would cause odor, especially when compared to the fact that we're at a wastewater treatment plant right now. I don't want to speculate, so I'm not going to, but there's a mitigation measure that will handle potential odor if they're observed by the nearby public. And then there's also a mitigation measure to help with fugitive dust from the fallow fields down at the Lucerne Valley site. And again, air quality was mitigated to a level of less than significant. There are a number of biological resources mitigation measures, and this is probably where a lot of the costs are gonna go from the mitigation that we've identified. But as you guys know, members of the public, members of the board, you know, Big Bear has a lot of sensitive resources, and so to develop up here requires thought on design and monitoring by biological monitors to make sure that we're not significantly impacting animal and plant species that are special to this area. So I don't necessarily want to go through every single one, but if you guys have specific questions on them, when we get to questions after I'm done with the MRP discussion, I'm happy to talk that through, but did you have a question? I'm sorry, I thought I saw a hand go up, okay. Peripheral vision. But the only significant impact we identified for biological resources was related to the Baldwin Lake pipeline alignment. All other resource issues could be mitigated to a level of less than significant through some pre-construction surveys, some monitoring, strict regulations on how construction is conducted to prevent weeds from invading the site, those sorts of things. But because the birdfoot checker bloom, which is a sensitive species that was identified by a local resident up here in the 80s, is considered to be an endangered species by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, that was identified as a significant impact. But we did receive some really thoughtful comments from local resident Tim, or previous former local resident, actually lives, I think, in Redlands now, Tim Cran, and he has some interesting ideas that we'll be discussing internally to consider how to protect that species as part of that project. It still is identified as a significant impact in the EIR, but as with everything, things evolve, and we want to make sure that we're still considering protecting the environment if the Baldwin Lake pipeline alignment goes through. Moving on to cultural resources. Primarily, you know, so CRM Tech, who's been doing work up here for probably 30 years, they reviewed every part of the alignment for pipelines for every project. And as you know, Big Bear is also very sensitive for cultural resources, including archaeological and paleontological resources. So the only area where we really hit, not a snag, but hit a mitigation being needed is for the projects that don't have current locations. We don't know where the Sand Canyon monitoring wells are going to go. So those will just require a follow-on cultural resources report to just review. And that can even be part of a spec of a few sites that are being considered so that we make sure that we avoid those impacts as part of the overall program. There are some mitigation measures that pertain to making sure that if something is discovered, we notify the tribes and we notify, I think, an archaeologist for testing to look at what the resource is, and that's part of the mitigation and monitoring program as well. Cultural resources were considered to be less than significant with mitigation. And just to note, there was a mitigation measure that was added in the cultural resources section as a result of our consultation with the of San Manuel Nation. I hate that I can't pronounce that very well, but formerly San Manuel Band of Mission Indians. As you know, Baldwin Lake and sort of the hills over by where the Shade Pond conveyance pipeline is are considered to be pretty parts of their origin story. So reaching an agreement that we wouldn't significantly impact resources in their mind was a pretty, I think, a mark of success in collaboration with the team. So they did include a mitigation measure for archaeological monitoring, kind of at their discretion for various components of the program. Moving on to geology and soils, I would say that the mitigation measures in geology and soils are pretty standard, and I skipped over energy because energy did not require any mitigation measures, so the impacts for energy were less than significant. For geology and soils, these are relatively standard measures that you would see in any kind of development project, including BMPs for and those types of things. And then under geology and soils, there's also a question pertaining to paleontological resources, and there's a mitigation measure to kind of cover if any paleontological resources are discovered during the ground excavation for the projects that are considered. I'm sorry if this is boring. I'm doing my best to get through it, but there are bajillion mitigation measures. I'm on page 32 of 51, so I'm hurrying and trying to be as concise as I can. Next up after that would be greenhouse gas. And again, we fell under the significance thresholds for greenhouse gas. So there's no mitigation that was considered or necessary to minimize the emissions that would be generated by both construction and overall operation of the program. For hazards and hazardous materials, these were again standard measures related to the fact that there are some hazardous substances that are going to be utilized here at the plant, but they're no really different than what's already utilized. So the, continuing a hazardous management materials business plan as part of these mitigation measures, sort of covering the agencies if accidents occur. And there's also vector management because sometimes, water such as the brine could potentially draw the attention of mosquitoes. So there's plans in place for that. Moving on, that was considered to be less than significant with the implementation of mitigation as well. Hydrology and water quality, I don't necessarily want to throw it over to Lane and Antonio, but they did do the majority of writing the first two questions under hydrology because they're very complicated. But at the end of the day, the big question for hydrology is what impacts to any of the water quality across all of the watersheds that we're considering here would be impacted. That includes Lucerne Valley, which is part of the Colorado River Regional Water Quality Control Board. Also up here in the Santa Ana watershed, but also downstream with the city of Redlands and East Valley Water District, San Bernardino Valley, and Bear Valley Mutual. There's a lot of analysis in there, but effectively the determination was that the water quality impacts in the valley and downstream of the Santa Ana region would be less than significant, but the water quality in Lucerne Valley could potentially be degraded by taking away a dilution source, which is that effectively means that the water quality of Barw's effluent is slightly better for certain constituents than the water quality in Lucerne Valley. For groundwater, the impacts here and downstream were considered to be less than significant, but they were considered to be significant in Lucerne Valley because the Mojave Water Basin, Mojave Basin Authority, it's MWA, but it's not a Mojave Water Agency, but there's a water master too, that's MBA. I apologize for not remembering the acronym right now, but they consider Barwa's discharge from the or to the Lucerne Valley site that they own to be part of the their recharge. So I think in their plans, you'll see that they account for about 2,000 acre feet of water per year being recharged from the valley to Lucerne Valley. And so we had to identify a significant impact on their groundwater basin because we'd essentially be taking a portion of that water and keeping it on the, or up here in the Big Bear Valley. So that was identified as a significant impact, but for hydrology, there were no significant impacts identified related to Big Bear Valley. They were all related to the Lucerne Valley impacts. And that is why I think collaboration with the Lucerne Valley Economic Development Agency, the Mojave Resources Conservation District, and the Mojave Water Agency has been kind of critical, because these discussions were sort of had early on in the process rather than the moment that the EIR came out. So note that as far as mitigation, we do have sort of a conceptual mitigation to ensure that the water quality in Big Bear Lake and Stanfield Marsh and elsewhere in the program is monitored through an adaptive management and mitigation program. And that's what essentially hydrology 1 covers. And the remaining mitigation measures pertain to sort of how the Sand Canyon Recharge Project is managed, and relatively standard mitigation for like your SWPPPs, your WQMPs that all protect water quality as a result of stormwater runoff during construction and operation. Moving on to land use and planning. I believe we only had one mitigation measure that essentially helps to align the projects that are being proposed with the general plans of both the county and the city of Big Bear Lake. It's not it's enforceable and required as far as it doesn't create an incompatibility or risk to the project that's at hand. But land use and planning was considered less than significant with mitigation. Mineral resources, there are mineral resources up here in the valley, but they're not being mined. And the project wouldn't prevent any mineral resources from being recovered in the future. So that was considered to be less than significant. As far as noise, our noise modeler at Urban Crossroads did a very good job of modeling each and every, component of construction. And it kind of turns out that the drilling of the wells is likely gonna require some noise barriers, but that's pretty standard for well development. As see Reggie nodding his head, so it's pretty standard. And that would result in a less than significant noise impact, and that's really the only noise mitigation measure that's considered. For public services, actually, and I want to go back to population housing was considered less than significant. The project doesn't really create a growth inducing effect. So, and it wouldn't result in that many new employees as part of the project. And for recreation, we had a pretty robust discussion about the fact that Big Bear Lake could be recreated on more as part of the project. That was considered to be less than significant without mitigation, but it is a pretty interesting discussion if you want to go there, because to that part of the EIR, primarily because it took a lot of thought to sort of think about what management is in place of the lake can already handle the maximum level of the lake, right? So if there's more recreation, that's kind of covered by existing programs and mechanisms to be able to handle that. For public services, the only mitigation measure is related to illegal trespass by just ensuring that the future facilities that have a permanent footprint that's above ground are fenced. For transportation, we have pipelines being installed on the roadway, so we obviously need some flag people and construction management to manage traffic. As you know, we're not really impacting roadways like Big Bear Boulevard. We're more impacting local roadways potentially, but there will be traffic persons to manage the installation of the pipeline that will be installed as part of the project. And then we get to tribal cultural resources, which is another area where we spoke with the tribe. The only tribe that has contacted Barwa is the YSNN. And we had a very long discussion with them. And the one thing that came out of it, other than their sort of standard mitigation, is that they want to have some involvement in deciding the kind of color that's used for the material, the lining in Baldwin Lake. And I thought that was a pretty interesting request, just to keep the view for them, the view shed for them sacred, as part of their sacred home, not home, but sort of lore. And they also requested a pre-construction cultural sensitivity training, which I've been seeing more and more on projects lately. So that'll be part of the sort of pre-construction discussion between the contractor, the tribal monitor, and the construction staff. And that was considered to be less than significant with the implementation of mitigation. We're almost done. So the utilities and service systems is next. And in that regard, we really didn't have too many impacts up here. They kind of mirror hydrology in the sense that we did identify a significant impact related to the Lucerne Valley, the reduction in discharge to Lucerne Valley, because there's a question regarding water supply. And again, the water master down there does account for that supply of recharge in the Lucerne Valley area. So we had to identify that as a significant impact. There's also a question about will the project's construction result in a significant impact related to the construction of water or wastewater facilities. So we kind of thought, well, the pipeline that's going through Baldwin Lake has a significant impact on biological resources, or may have a significant impact on the bird checker bloom. So we identified a significant impact in this area as well. Most of the mitigation measures here are very standard in that they deal with sort of drainage, making sure that each site is designed with appropriate drainage, with an appropriate drainage plan. And kind of related to recycling and making sure that we're like fully recycling part of the CND above and beyond what's required by state law. And then finally, I believe we've gotten to wildfire, and under wildfire, there are a couple mitigation measures to help with again, traffic management and emergency services in the event of a fire, and then also sort of the creation of a fire management plan and fuel modification plan that's incorporated into the facility here, as well as, and it also kind of pertains to construction, because there's instances of use of different types of equipment that can create sparks, so those would be disallowed just because of the high fire potential up here. And that is it for my presentation on the mitigation measures. I feel like I should take a breath and ask if you guys have any questions.
You mentioned Mojave Water and their concern about losing water if this goes into effect. Were they in receipt of the letter that says they acknowledge this isn't their water to begin with?
Yes, it's part of the
And then not only for your aspect, but probably for each as they go in and break this down. When you talk about the project, are you talking about from the production of new water all the way to when it ends up back in the ground table at Sand Canyon? Or are you stopping at division?
We're talking about the whole program that involves the Sand Canyon portion. Obviously, the impacts can be somewhat separated, and in the EIR, they are separated in the sense of each project or project type is analyzed individually for each of the questions at hand. And then the whole of the program is considered, because that's what CEQA mandates.
And when you talked about energy use or production, was that including solar panels to the south of this building?
Yeah, so we actually did a lot of modeling to figure out like how much energy this particular amount of solar is going to generate. And it did offset a lot of the impacts related to air quality. So they're pretty key to being able to do that. And I believe, in fact, the only areas that would create a sort of a above that net zero energy are the ones that are off Barwis site. So what I'm talking about is like outside of Barwis service area, the projects being considered by BBL DWP. Now, obviously, if any of the other agencies wanted to install solar to accommodate the minimal energy that those facilities are gonna take, that can be considered at a later time.
And the idea of being off borrow facility. When this was developed, were you aware that the land for those panels south of this building would not be on borrow property?
What I mean by that is, you know, in the EIR, we talk about individual projects, right? So the Barwell wastewater treatment project, upgrades project encompasses this whole property as well as the property to our south. As part of the project, not because it's, or pardon me, let me rephrase. Just because it's not owned by Barwa doesn't mean it wasn't considered as part of that project. If Barwa had to, for instance, relocate those panels somewhere else, it could be considered as part of a CEQA addendum or something, at a later date. But regardless, it's all considered to be part of that particular project. What I'm saying is that the like Sand Canyon recharge project, for instance, which includes several components, including monitoring wells and the booster pump station, just again, relatively nominal energy consumption. Those facilities were not considered to be utilizing the solar that's being generated on this site or this area.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Any other questions? No? Okay,
All right, so, adoption process, is that you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So moving forward, right now, we're finalizing our responses to comments. During the public review period, we received a couple of comment letters from the public. We've been responding to those, so, right. Once we're done with those, we will be releasing those back to the public, and that will be on the 12th. On the 19th, we're planning to release the final program EIR. On the 24th, at your board meeting, we're planning to only certify the EIR. That's essentially saying that you've reviewed and considered the information in the EIR. And at the next board meeting, you'll consider adoption of the EIR. With that, you'll also have the findings of facts, which essentially explains the conclusions of the EIR. You'll also adopt the mitigation monitoring and reporting program, and then you'll have a statement of overriding considerations. That's essentially, it's just statements that explain that the benefits of the projects outweigh those significant impacts. Hopefully the day after, or a couple days after, we'll file the notice of determination with the state. That's gonna start your statute of limitations for challenging the projects, and that will last for 30 days. So it's a very simple process moving forward, but we're gonna be breaking it up into 2 board meetings. April and May is the plan.
Did I understand then that if there's an adoption, then you have 30 days?
Right, so you will adopt the EIR. You have 5 days to file that notice of determination. When that's filed and posted on OPR's website, which is usually the same day that you file, that starts the statute of limitations.
Which part is going to go on the May meeting?
The main meeting would be the the approval of the project. So in the April meeting is the certification of the EIR. The May meeting is the adoption of the, the approval of the project. Sorry, I can use those words.
And again, when you say project,
Program. It's the whole program.
yeah, thank you. As was pointed out, some of this hasn't been determined yet. So how do you go about approving the project without knowing all the details?
That's a great question. So this is considered a program EIR, which essentially means that there's many different projects under one heading. It has the same purpose. So those projects that we weren't able to fully analyze, it'll be up to the implementing agency to go back and do some additional environmental review, and they'll go through a separate process and essentially tier off of this EIR.
No? Okay. All right, so we'll move on to program partner responsibilities. That you and me. That me? Both, so, both, do we, I guess there is, been some discussion with regard to, so during this process, DWP, CSD, and MWD, and BARWA, you know, kind of partnered up and took on this project, originally. We've been working through, this whole process for, well, I've been here since 2017, so I know it started before I got here, as a group. And then, as the, project progressed, at a certain point in time, there was a discussion about BARWA. It went from a planning process more to a, project process. And so we went from just planning our project till we started getting into an actual where the project took flight, and then we, at that point, that's when we were cost sharing up until that point, and then that's when we stopped cost sharing at that point, when it became an actual, capital project for BARWA itself, and that's what the board decided at that point. I don't know, do you want to touch anything else on responsibilities and where we are with those?
I think it would help to know what folks are interested in hearing about if we're talking about what aspect of the program BAR would be responsible for versus, the other agencies. Is that part of what we want to kind of cover? Okay. So BARWA, as the wastewater agency, would be responsible for the upgraded treatment in the pipeline to Stanfield Marsh, and they would be the holder of that discharge permit. So they'd be responsible for complying with all the water quality requirements that the regional board is going to put in that discharge permit. And then once it's discharged into the lake, I believe my understanding is that Big Bear Municipal Water District would take ownership of that water, and then subsequently, DWP and CSD would have access to that, for the purpose of groundwater recharge. So I think BARWA's responsibility would end at the point where it's discharged to the lake, and then other program partners would, oversee the other aspects of the program. For example, it's envisioned that DWP would oversee the same kind of recharge, upstream of their wells in their service area, and transfer that water to CSD through an existing interconnection.
So is it just then DWP that, what responsibilities does CSD have?
It's actually DWP and CSD.
It's both of us.
Yeah.
Do they know? I mean,
Yeah. Yeah, DWP would operate the facilities. The pumping costs to pump it out of the ground and deliver it to CSD via, the interconnections. Is our interconnection agreement with CSD states that if, we deliver water to you, you pay for the pumping costs. If you deliver water to us, we pay for your pumping costs. Because, if I get it from CSD, I would have had to pump it out of the ground, so it's really the same dollars. It's just, I would write them a check if they delivered me water from the interconnection and vice versa. So, but as we're, our current interconnection agreement doesn't go into the minute detail of, oh, you know, you used 1.5% of the water that we pumped out of the ground, so you're responsible for the O&M expense for the pump. It's just not, it's so minute, we don't go into that detail. It's just, what was our power bill when we pumped X amount of water? Okay, your proportionate share was $50 or whatever that number might be.
I mean, I obviously don't understand that much
Yeah, well,
about
the-
CSD, but.
and for a scale, we average about $250 per acre foot to pump water out of the ground. So that's just to give you a feel for the magnitude of the.
I guess I'm just trying to figure out, because I know there's been this discussion about the whole water equity thing.
Mhm.
So that's why I asked, like,
Yeah.
does CSD, I mean,
We understand the shared cost of the water that we would pay for if we were taking it from that system. But the equity part you're talking about was Larry's point of the 2/3, 1/3 part that he was talking, and then the bigger percentage of water pool that is going into the lake is what he was referring to. Not the interconnect agreement that we have from 2015, I think it's been.
Yeah.
Or sometime.
Yeah. That's
And the proportionate cost sharing that we have depending on which way the water's going. And that would continue through.
Yeah, and, you know, we have the letter of intent between the two agencies, and I envision the final agreement would have because population shifts and that and pumping shifts. Currently, we're using the quantity of water that both agencies pumped out of the ground in fiscal year 2022, and it was 32% CSD and 68% PWP. Now, if more full-time residents move into CSDs and it changes to, 34, 66, we would have in the agreement to look at that every year and adjust it as needed. So that the proportion would be relevant to what was actually pumped out of the base.
I guess I'm just trying to understand because I know people on the east end feel like they aren't getting as much benefit as Bigger Lake.
Mhm.
So I'm trying to understand all of that.
That question, from my understanding, refers to, so the 1/3 part that we're talking about that CSD would take advantage of is the 130 acre feet. So they're pulling that 130 acre feet out of the 2,200 or 2,000 acre feet that goes into, that comes out of Barlow South and South. That's what they're referring to when they're talking about equity share. If it was 2,000 acre feet and 1,000 went to DWT and 1,000 twice, they would say then that was equal.
The only issue that, just to, DWP actually services some of the east side. Sure.
It's not some, it's almost 50%. It's a huge number of connections.
Through
Abs-
DWP?
Yes. Yeah, it's not a small amount. So Sugarloaf alone, we have almost 16,000 customers, and Sugarloaf alone, because of its density, is over 3,000 customers. So, and then we do Warren Lake, portion of Whispering Forest, and Bonskin is another 700 connections that are outside of the city limits, and then also Lake William. So it's people envision it because it's city of Big Bear Lake DWP, the most and it's a percentage basis, yes, but it's 50, I don't know, 54, 46, it's in that realm.
Yeah, that's interesting. I guess I just thought a division,
Yeah, no.
everything that way was CSD.
Some services.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's where the 2/3, 1/3, we've got 6,000 customers, he has 12,000 customers, so of that. You know, for a 380 acre feet or whatever, 2/3, 1/3 part is where the division part.
Our interconnections are, one's at Division, right by the convention center, and the other one's over by the tennis range in Urban Lake. We serve a lot of people over there.
Most of the collection system is at Division, and, you know, CSD is from Division all the way over here. There is a portion of a line that comes off of Castle Glen. No, that's Castle Glen, that actually feeds in from Big Bear Lake system into CSD system, and that's subtracted off. I mean, so there's a lot of little nuances about not only collections, but water systems. So when people are talking about, well, the East End doesn't get their fair share, obviously he is servicing some of that, you know, half of it, probably close to half of that fair share on the East End, just to, you know, talk about that.
So
But
when,
it's good to know, because this is one of my third meetings. So.
Yes.
Yeah.
so when we talk percentages too, we get confused with, like, when we talk water, 2/3, 1/3. When we talk sewer, we're talking close to 50-50 in that case, just sorry to exclude the pawn scheme on that, percent, but you know, it's close. So that's why, you have to realize what you're talking about which one you're talking about when you talk about, percentages. And so you may hear the 1/3 part, and then you're thinking, but I thought it was 50% or 48%.
Because he gives them water and puts it in his sewer.
Yeah, and because we have over 40% of our customers outside of the city limits, if you take CSD's percentage and our percentage that we serve outside of the city, the majority is outside of the city limits, between those two.
It does kind of lead us into that next program, water equity. And we had a little bit of a discussion at the last meeting, and I know it probably got really confusing, right? With regard to program, water and equity, and I did my best to try and enlighten everybody on how we calculate as far as the fixed portion and the variable portion of that. But I don't know if committee was interested in having a further discussion about that, or even furthering the discussion that takes it forward to the board for more consideration at that point. And I can just remind, so what the discussion was, is we looked at, right now, the way we calculate our variable portion is we take the 3-year average of flow of the last 3 years. We take the average, then we multiply that by and we figure out the percent of flow. If we took those percent of flow and we multiplied that towards the 2,200 acre feet that this project is ultimately going to produce, currently it produces, you know, somewhere around 2,000. And then split that up between the two agencies, or the majority of the two agencies, because the county still is between 4% and 5%, of, you know, depending on the average. You know, conceivably, CSD could end up with, I think I calculated like 954 acre feet of the project water, and the city would be 1,156, I think it was, acre feet of the water, of that 2,200. And so I just wanted to find out if the committee was interested in furthering that discussion. I mean, obviously, for CSD to take ownership of that water, there would be some additional infrastructure they would have to put in to figure out how, how to either spread it or inject it or do whatever they wanted to do with it. There's also could be, some, other, if something ever happens with this, AB 574, this, potable reuse, portion of it, that could be a discussion, as well. And in the future, it's probably more towards the future because at this point, those guidelines don't exist. But it's something that, CSD could consider in the future. They wanted to do something with, their portion of the water that was generated from this project. So I just wanted to bring it to the committee and see if there was any desire to further that discussion. And so that way there was that east end, west end, this whole discussion about equity issues and all that kind of stuff. I want to be able to, either pursue it or put it to bed.
I would like to see it further discussed. It seems that this project, program, whatever you want to call it, is schizophrenic in that sometimes we talk about it as the sewage and the resource, and the other time we talk about it being the new clean water. When we talk about sewage, 47% City of Big Bear Lake, 48% CSD, 5% county. So then when you talk about supplying water to Sugarloaf, yes, because the city seized SoCal Water at the time, and that's how they ended up with all these disjointed responsibilities. But you don't provide the sewer services. So it gets to be, sometimes we're responsible for half, sometimes we're only qualified for a third. And even the third is 1/3 of the 2,000 or 500 acre feet, which if it's 1/3 of 1/4, it turns out to be 1/12. So we end up with something like 8.5%. It depends on what you do with the numbers, on how this is raised. And then ultimately, if it no longer belongs to the Barwa, when it hits division, now belongs to MWD, and I got that verified, I thought, at the last meeting. It now belongs to MWD, and if we want the water to go to Sand Canyon, we have to buy it back after having given it to them in the first place. And that's where I get concerned about the number and how they're being crunched.
Well, and again, so that's why we're having this discussion, and I understand the confusion. At one point in time, the reason we got to this 500 acre feet, so that way you understand how that number was developed.
The capacity of Sand Canyon.
The capacity of Sand Canyon, perfect. So it's the capacity of Sand Canyon and what the golf course was taking out. So it's the 380 acre feet plus the 120 acre feet that the golf course was taking out. That turned into the 500 acre feet. At the time, your general manager at the time and the general manager from DWP had that discussion. It's like, okay, this is the most cost-effective method to reclaim some of this water was to utilize the pipeline that was already existing for snowmaking. And chose at that point in time to say, okay, this is the most cost-effective, it's an existing pipeline. We're not having to put in 7 miles of pipeline up to Sand Canyon. We're not having to build a whole spreading ground up in Van Dusen or Green Spot. We're not having to build these additional infrastructure pieces. And so they chose to go with the path, let's say, of least resistant, most cost-effective method. That's why they chose to do it that way. When it was Sand Canyon as the most cost-effective method of doing water sustainability, then they looked at how much we actually had to go back and look at it again and have Tom Harder go back in and actually evaluate it exactly how much it could recharge. And he did an additional,
Well, it's not a precise science.
Right.
It's approximate.
approximately,
Yeah, it could be.
380, it could be, 400, it could be 360, it depends, and it depends on the time of the year, it depends on if water's flowing, I mean, there's all kinds of different, parameters around this, because it does vary. So when they took that 500 acre feet, they decided, okay, so, DWP is, services, 67% of the valley with water, and CSD services 33% of the valley with water, and those are rough, but they're about that. And that's how they came up with that, applying that against that 500 acre feet, which they chose. Meaning, at that point, your GM at that point and the current GM at DWP chose to do it that way.
Yeah, and Larry, the, putting in Sand Canyon versus Green Spot, that was originally developed in the first study that was done in 2015 and 16. And that was Scott Bewley, who's a hydrogeologist, he would have the expertise on, percolation and in this valley, he's done lots of work on that. And that's where we determined that Green Spot, although it is a good place to percolate and you can put 1,000 acre feet a year, there's just not, that's not where we're pumping, not where DWP's pumping or CSD's pumping. Yes, you can put it there, but there's not a demand, and it would eventually mound up near the tennis ranch area. And to prevent the mounding from becoming detrimental to the homes there, because the groundwater table would come up that high, you would have to drill a series of wells, I believe it was 6, to intercept that. And you'd have to pump that and then move it around your system or our systems through boosters. Like for us, we'd have to lift up over Moon Ridge and then put it to the west because we have enough capacity in our wells on the east side. You would be pumping it more over towards, the Bear City near the airport and Whispering Forest. So there'd be, or you can put in Sand Canyon and deliver it direct without doing that extra pumping. So that was the thought process when we originally developed that the most economical way to take advantage of this new water source would be to put it into Sand Canyon, distribute it through our existing interconnections.
Maybe an unfair question because it is new to the district. But since we have a green spot reservoir and I understood at least one well on site, we do have wells, a green spot.
I don't know if we have sufficient number for what, there'd be more research done from our side of this, and our perspective to see. But, the previous notes stated that we don't have enough.
Demand, right, over there.
Well,
Demand and the ability to get it out of the ground.
in
Stop that
Facilities
pollution, man.
facilities to get it out of the ground.
yeah, we have 2 operating wells in that area too. They're currently used just for emergency if our Maple well that's up in Sugarloaf has a problem, which it does this week because the power pole tipped over. So that we don't have power. So for the last week, we have been using the well that's located over by the tennis ranch, but that's very intermittent when things like this occur.
But did I misunderstand the EIR and the presentations to say that the water, once it reaches Sand Canyon, it could take 9 months, maybe more, maybe less. It could be the 500, maybe more, maybe less. It will then reach DWP wells and enter the DWP system, but that water does not come out to the CSD. It'll be water out here, which is already in our aquifer. We're not getting any new water brought into our system.
The interconnection at, the convention center would be taking water from the St. Canyon wells. So that water, wouldn't be molecule for molecule, but you would be getting your 1/3 of the 500 acre feet, and you wouldn't have to pump that water out of your aquifers.
But
So
in past discussions, it's always been the intertie out here, not the one division.
it can be either one.
Could be, yeah. Then the other thing you brought up was water for the golf course. Who owns the golf course?
Bear Mountains Golf Course. Oh, yeah, ski fields.
So they probably have some EDUs, some skin in the game. But in terms of their contributions to this project, in terms of paying for it, building it, we might use their pipeline, but we don't have an agreement to know if they will allow that or at what cost. And it's another one of those, that's why I was asking about future portions of this project. That's why I question the equity of who's putting the money in to run the plant currently. And then who's going to draw the water back out. And the agreement for the 1/3, 2/3 purchase, I understood initially was to borrow it, that CSD and DWP would purchase that water. But now I find out that once it leaves your pipe at division, it's not yours anymore, so you can't possibly be selling that to us.
Well, I mean, I mean, I know it sounds it's a little difficult to, you know, thoroughly describe, but at this point, the MOU that we have in place is with CSD and DWP.
The letter of.
I'm sorry, letter of intent, I'm sorry. The letter of intent that we have with DWP and CSD is with Barwa to purchase this water. It's just a letter of intent, that's all it is. The reason we went that route, we did draft one for NWD as well. But again, we had that whole discussion about why they didn't sign that in the past.
And they still haven't.
And they still haven't, that's right, they still haven't, but there's, you know, we're making progress on that, so it's a good thing. But again, it's really to fund O&M, so it's really not, we're not delivering water yet, we're not doing any of that stuff yet, so you know, we've got some time. But eventually, I foresee the agreement actually being with NWD, CSD, and DWP. Brokered by, obviously, Barwa, because we want to make sure they get their portion of the water, so it'll be a broker, you know, agreement with, Barwa being, making sure that CSD and DWP get their share of that 500, not the share, the whole share of the water. If, again, you know, we have a separate discussion, but that was specifically with regard to what we already had in the plans.
And understanding that agreement says right in there, something to the effect of.
It's not financial boundary.
All bets are
Yeah.
off as soon as you produce the first water, then it has to be renegotiated.
Well, what it says is, originally we had set it for 12 months to come up with a financial agreement. Right, and then, you know, there was delays in the project stalled a little bit. And so when it came time for that, the expiration of that letter of intent, we went ahead and extended that. I think is it 2 years, 1 year?
1 year.
1 year.
September.
September of this coming year, it'll be either renegotiate at that point or put in an actual agreement will be put in place either with Barwa or with NWD at some point in time when all of this gets flushed out. And that's what we're working on, is flushing those agreements out.
But it's still true that at this time, 1/4 of the water is proposed for St. Canyon. The other 3/4 goes in the lake
That's
or whatever beautification, recreation, whatever it's going to be called.
right.
And there's no pledge from MWD to pay for that water, to contribute to the plant, to produce it, et cetera.
There's no formal agreement, that's correct, no formal agreement at this time. We haven't produced any water. We haven't gotten to that point where we have they asked for a few different guidelines, and one of them is they want to know what the permit requirements are going to be for the additional testing they're gonna have to do in the lake. Right, so that way they can figure out what their cost is to go out and do the additional testing, the monitoring and testing that's required for our permit, Barwa's permit. They're gonna have to do testing and monitoring. So in our budget already is monitoring and testing for the lake. We included it in our budget. Obviously, the goal is to not do monitoring and testing of the lake because we're not in the lake business. They're in the lake business, and so they would be responsible for doing that portion of the work. In addition, there is some offset programs that are gonna be required as part of the permit to offset for the phosphorus and nitrates that are being placed in the lake, because we don't have an allocation for phosphorus and nitrates, and we'll have an offset program for that as well. That will also be something that MWD can consider as part of their in-kind services towards this project. Again, and there could be other opportunities for MWD to contribute towards a project, and it's gonna have to be negotiated that portion, but at this moment, we have no formal agreements. And that's correct, but had discussions and, we've had discussions back and forth.
But we are encumbering every private home, every business, every commercial property that is connected to Barwa to pay for this project. And yet the benefit to those individuals is a portion of the water produced, the majority of which is gonna end up in the lake.
Well, I mean, from a Barwa perspective, we are treating the water, right? After the treatment of water, we're looking for a place to dispose it. It's either dispose of it in Lucerne or dispose of it in the lake. It's the board's perspective, whether they which one they would like to do. Either one, we can do it in Lucerne until they stop us from doing it or modify our permit to do something different, or we can do it up in the lake and keep the water in our valley and have the opportunity for water sustainability, additional habitat, economics, recreational opportunities. That's what it does. But as far as perspective, we're just looking to dispose of the water. If we dispose of the water and CSD wants to take their portion of the disposal of water and do something else with it, CSD is welcome to do that. They've already paid for it through the rate structure. They've already paid for it. They are welcome, free of charge, to go and take that water and do something else with it, right? Just like the city would be welcome to take their water. If they said, okay, we're gonna
pipe, we're gonna plumb it here and you guys, and we can take it up to wherever we wanna put it, put whatever we wanna do with it. You know, if Reggie can work that whole concept out with the city and they're welcome to do what they want with it as well, because again, their rates, the city's rate structure is covering that portion of that. So I don't know if that helps at all. I'm not trying to confuse things, I'm trying to keep it as simple as
But
possible.
at this time,
Yes,
the project only covers getting water to division. There is nothing to get it to Sand Canyon and back in the ground charge, or as the young lady suggested, we should be putting the water back where it came from. And instead, we are producing water that goes not back where it came from for our share of it.
well, I'm gonna agree to disagree with the young lady. Because the part of the water comes from the west end, part of it comes from the east end. You know, just piping it up to the east end obviously wouldn't accomplish that. Right, so I'm gonna agree to disagree with her, that's not really the case. What's really taking place is, I'm looking for a place to dispose of this water. If you choose to keep it on this mountain, then if you choose to keep it, on the mountain, then you choose to do that. And there are opportunities for CSD and the city, for that matter, and the county, to do something different with their portion of the water. If they choose to, if they want to take ownership of the water and give it to, sell it to MWD, that would be the city could do that. The CSD could do that. If they wanted to pump it up, spray it, do what they want with it, it's fine. I'm just looking for a place to dispose of it. I can do it in Sand Canyon or I can do it at the lake. And then that's really the only guidelines I have for it, if that makes sense.
But in reading, and yes, I'm reading all of your work.
Oh, no, that's great.
The talk is we want to keep the water in the valley.
Yes,
And
it's the smartest thing to do, right?
as you have said, there could come a point at which we are flat out told we can't send the water down back anymore.
At some point in time, there could be that guideline could come out, yes,
But if the goal is to keep the water here,
yes.
and then we start talking about selling it to mutual, which has been brought up, spilling over the dam if it ever got that full. And I would go back to, I have explained why I say there is absolutely no way that this project, even once completed, can keep the lake full. Simply can't do it. There is no way that we can drought proof, which I think would by chapter 3 in the EIR actually use that term, and I was surprised to see it. That we would drought proof the valley.
Well, I mean, and I don't know, Caitlin, you maybe, I don't remember chapter 3 specifically.
That's the project description. So that was developed by us and Big Bear, but I think the question of sustainability goes back to the groundwater sustainability plan and the amount of water that was identified in that plan to cover the need for water in the valley for how many years?
34 years.
I think that analysis looked out to 2050.
2050, that's what I.
Might have been 2070.
In the
I think
GFP.
2070.
So that's what's being identified as drought proof, if anything at all. It's not the lake saying the lake is gonna be full at all. And then
No,
we
but
are
when
pretty
you-
clear on that, and I think that discussion is coming up next.
But when you say drought proof, and DWP and CSD both have 5-point programs on how to manage water as a drought impacts the valley. And both of them include the fact that we will cut back what people can use. And if they can't use as much, then obviously they can't send as much to the plant. They then cannot possibly produce enough to drought proof. It will be a spiral.
Okay, so I'm gonna help with that piece a little bit, because I mean, right now, I think DWP and CSD together, they're somewhere 3,200 acre feet, somewhere right there in a year. We get about we get about 2,000 acre feet at our facility, sometimes less, sometimes a little bit more, but in a rough it. So we're talking about recapturing 2/3 of what is being used right now in rough numbers, okay? So when we're talking about water sustainability, that goes a long ways to recapturing 2/3 of the water that you are right now sending off back down the hill. That's, I mean, that is up there in that water sustainability. If you 101 in the entire California, those would be numbers that is probably unheard of anywhere else. To recapture that water, 2/3 of the entire water that you use, okay? So that's, you know, when we're talking about drought proof, those are the kind of things. You had just, sorry, you were talking about another piece of that, you mentioned that.
The keeping the lake full, which.
Keeping the lake full, and
Obviously.
Lane's going to enhance that piece about keeping the lake full. Obviously, we know better than that, keeping the lake full, that's not really. That, you know, and the MWD, the mutual part. That mutual part, as far as selling the water to mutual or additional, water. That's available to in fills and spills or releases or whatever those things are. Again, that's a management issue for MWD to handle. We don't do that. We're disposal of the water. MWD can handle whether they're going to have additional releases. I mean, it's a true management thing, and it depends on lots of stuff, how much rainwater, how much, where the lake levels are, the 77 judgment. I mean,
To address that, the MWD on average, the lake spills about every 10 years. Currently, it's been about 13 years because we had a 5-year drought in there, so it hasn't met the 10-year requirement. The studies about how the project will affect the lake said instead of spilling it every 10 years, it might spill every 4 or 5 years. So those years where it might spill are the years that might be an opportunity for MWD to sell water to the downstream users. But only, so it will maybe double those opportunities with the product, not every year.
Blaine, did you want to go over this graph?
Yeah,
So,
sure.
at the back?
I saw it.
Yeah.
You want a 10-minute break?
Yes, can we take?
Yeah.
We've been doing it since 2 hours.
Why there's only one husband.
We do watch them tag if that's okay.
Yeah.
Like the lunchtime break, if I get on. I'm not running the city, but
Now we know.
we can bring up a NASCAR and Oscar. The NASCAR got one way, running Oscar, running to the show.
You know, my round is
Get an extra mile on that.
yeah.
Everything is exactly. That's why you have. Is that?
It's not.
That's why it's just.
I didn't even hear it.
We're gonna, she's checking. Go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
He gave us a card.
It only goes, no, good question.
Yeah.
No, yeah. Different stress. I mean, like, better. Right now. Yeah.
They said it's asking.
Now I'm off tomorrow. Pretty good. I wanted all my. I did 2 last week, and I did 2 this week. Not sure, but I broke my jaw. I do that at my football college. So I really sad. So tomorrow night, I actually.
Eric?
Yeah. Thank you.
And then our treatment engineer.
Yeah, things you do when you're married. Because, yeah. Lunchtime, okay, I'll do what you say.
That's fair. That is nice. That is nice.
And she's doing a master's in bionutrition. Functional medicine, so. She's a lot of years,
Yeah.
I don't know, because I'm having a, making me very famous to that. Yeah, we're probably. Just need to kind of use that.
There we go. Thank you.
Just read it, so I have a yellow milkshake. I'll do that. Okay. I'll get the camera. Yeah. I know that it's there, but. I know just out of reading that ground sustainability, for 220 pages or something. Yeah. I know. That's how I have to keep together. Either live in it or use it as there. We can't have them in one zone.
Yeah. It's better.
I was thinking of your plan, but down the hill. Right, the time on my bill, so I think it's out there. So we need to, fast forward. My wife said, "What's good?" I said, "I'm buying a boat." Oh, we- That's kind of scary. I was like, "Yeah, I'm good."
That should be.
Yeah.
Yeah, priority. And then.
Get away from the Mentioned.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're trying for what things in there. This is how. The marina, that's. Not just like the marina, right? Maybe the contract, but not just. Yeah, yeah, like, I was so nervous. That's how we get
Can we get everybody to come back to their seats? Okay, all right, everybody, we're ready to start up again. Okay. Find your seats, thank you. Yeah, that's right. All right, so, I think, what we were gonna do next is actually have Lane go over, the, lake impact and evaporation graph that's been included with your packet. So it's in the back of your packet. Lane, I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, sure. So that very last sheet, the front of it shows a graph from 1977 to 2019, and then the back is just a zoom in of that period from 2011 and 2019, so you can see it a little better. And we've been presenting this graph at board meetings, I think for about the last year, so this isn't new, it's on the website, it's been shared, many times. And so the source of this data is actually from MWD. They had Don Evanson, their water master engineer, use the water master model to take a look back in time and say, if we had started this project back in 1977, what would have been the impact to the lake? And that's what you see here on this graph. So the black line is the actual lake level that has occurred historically. And then the blue increment there shows what the model predicted as far as what the lake levels would have been if this water was going in. And so it incorporates evaporation, incorporates the extractions for recharge at Sand Canyon, it incorporates the downstream releases and all of those things that are considered as part of lake management and the water master report. And so if you take a look at, that 30-year period, it's, kind of what Reggie mentioned, facility spills, that are happening cyclically. And so Larry, as you know, you are still gonna see the lake going up and down in hydrologic condition. Absolutely, this water is not enough to keep the lake full. That's never been our statement for sure. These, fluctuations are pretty dramatic. Sometimes you're getting 40,000 acre feet into the lake and sometimes you're getting 2,000, right? And so, but the real benefit starts to accumulate, right? When you get those multiple dry years, when you see the lake level just generally continue to go down, every year you're accumulating, whether it's 4 inches or 6 inches, right, depending on how high the lake is. And so in those extended dry periods that you've seen many of historically, that's where you see the benefit. So if you look on the very, very back page, it's just to zoom in. Of the most recent period, I think that everyone remembers where in, 2010, 2011, I think it was December 2010, there were some really intense storms, the lake filled up and spilled. That was the last time the lake spilled. And since then, it's been relatively dry, some blips in 2017 and 2019 where you got more precipitation, but relatively dry. And so you see that benefit kind of start to accumulate between 2011 and 2019 on this graph. And so it shows kind of at the end, that 2019 period, about a 4.5 foot overall impact to benefit the lake. And this is looking backward, at what would have happened had this discharge been in place at that time. We did also do some analysis looking forward as part of the project, although it's, we won't try to predict what, future rainfall will be. But it could be a range. We certainly do anticipate continuing to see these types of cycles. But the benefit that the project provides is that the lows don't get as low. And so you can see that here on the graph. And then as Reggie noted, there's, you can see kind of when the lake is higher on this graph, the benefit isn't quite as much, and that's because the lake is already more full, the surface area is larger. And during those times when the lake would spill anyway, that's water that isn't going to be staying in the valley, like it will just spill. And so that's where the opportunity comes in that David was mentioning, for various agencies to try to optimize the benefit locally. I think the downstream agencies do understand that there will be a benefit to them, that there will be additional releases from the lake. And there are some discussions in place around that too. There's an incentive program one of the agencies offers that might be able to contribute. So just, agreeing, Larry, that absolutely will not keep the lake full. That's not a message we've been trying to send. And I think that, this graph shows you, what it could do in the future. If the hydrology is, if you have even longer droughts, you could see more benefits. But again, in those wet periods, that's when, the lake is already full, then you could consider, doing other things with the water at that time, to benefit the residents in other ways.
And I'm not meaning to shoot the messenger. We agree that it cannot keep the lake full.
Yeah.
The other side of that was the marketing. Perhaps that's an offensive term, but the presentations where this has been taken to CSD, DWP, wherever, when those terms are used about how it will keep the lake full or how it can drought-proof the valley, that's simply, I really wish that they would stop using that because I think it misleads people. And when you see, whether it's binding or not, survey or a poll in the newspaper, that's why I question when people say, this is a great idea, I'm all for it. Do they really understand, or have they heard the marketing part and not the cost and the engineering realities?
Well, I can answer from our perspective. Our firm produces a lot of the, the information and the slides that are shared, and this is what we produced. It's very, very important to me that we're sharing accurate information as engineers. And so we've tried to be clear about what the benefits are and are not. And certainly ourselves have never claimed it will keep the lake full. It will not. So it's very clear. And so I have also heard, that term used, and we've tried to make sure that we're presenting correct information. I agree. I think we all agree that we don't want people thinking that it will keep the lake full at all times. That just simply isn't possible with the amount of water that's available. So I don't know if anyone else wants to add anything, but in our, the project team, I think, has been very careful about not trying to state that the lake will be full. We've never believed that to be true, and we've tried to produce information to help clarify that so that people who may think that can look at something like this and say, oh, okay, yeah, I see how much benefit it could have and when. And so, yeah, I'll let, if anyone else wants to.
Yeah, I mean, that's, I mean, I think the message that's been getting out is the fact that it keeps the lake more full more of the time, right? It doesn't, it's not gonna keep it full. MWD has their own definition of full. I'm sure it has to do with about lake releases and when it can be released and all that kind of stuff. But I know, based on the information provided to us, if history, we went back in time and put this water in the lake since we started tracking 2011, I guess, this graph is. It was 44 years, is that still the number? 44 years, we went back and modeled it and looked at it. It would add additional water in the lake, and during those low periods, when the lake was really low, it's about an average of 4.5 feet higher in the lake, which gives a lot more surface area to the lake. Pardon?
To evaporate.
Well, I mean, that, again, that is a topic of discussion, but I mean, I think it does come down to, we can put the water in the CERN and keep doing that, or we can keep the water on the mountain in our watershed and do that. That's really what it comes down to, and, it's up to the board to choose that. We either keep it on our mountain and have a project like this and keep it on our mountain, or we keep putting it down the CERN and do something and continue to do that.
And Larry, this chart graph does include evaporation. So when it's 18 feet down, which it was a few years ago, with the project, and we done it, began working on it, or actually implementing it, in 77, I believe, said, then instead of being 18 feet, it would be 13.5 feet. There's a huge difference,
Service was.
for the public, yeah, and that includes evaporation.
That's our valley. It's not just, like when we say our public, it's our valley. We all benefit from having a fuller lake. That's just, the way it is.
But, and you missed Mr. Brewster's evaluation of 4.4 inches and 48 inches in a season. I don't know where he got those numbers. I do know that from the MWD, they've admitted on a warm or hot, windy day in Big Bear, 3 inches a day lost to evaporation. So you could eat up, even if you put the full 2,000 acre feet in, that could very quickly literally evaporate and have no use at all.
Right, and so I've seen I think what you're referring to, that Charlie Brewster prepared with the 4.4 inches, and I do understand how he got that number, and it makes sense, and it actually is consistent with this same analysis. Because this analysis that's, that's resulting in this graph was done using the same information. And so the 4.4 inches is on, a given year. And then this graph shows what happens when it accumulates. And it does include evaporation. And so the 3 inches a day that could evaporate is a huge number, but that's going to happen with or without the project. When you add the project water in, some of that project water does evaporate. That's also accounted for here. So there is some amount of increased evaporation, and yeah, unfortunately, this water is not enough to offset all of the evaporation that already occurs in the lake. But it does help, and that evaporation, right, will be happening anyway. And so none of that is excluded from this analysis when we're talking about what the result would be.
But without being a hydrology engineer, I can see logically that if this water were put in inversion wells or the ground table or wherever, it would not be evaporating at this rate.
Right, yeah, there's very limited evaporation from groundwater.
So we have to choose. It's been suggested that we should choose to let it evaporate.
I mean, it's up to the board to decide. You know, and then it would be, this board would decide, and then your respective member agencies, the city council, CSD's board, would then have to decide what they wanted to do, whether they wanted to spend the additional funding to go and take it further.
Was the original study done for compliance with the state's sustainability study? Was that done by WSC?
Yes, the one in 2016.
So didn't we start out initially looking pretty good, and then there was a reevaluation saying that on a horizon of 20 years, we'd be in a world of hurt?
Are you referring to the groundwater basin? In terms of looking pretty good versus being in a world of hurt?
Whatever
I can
was
answer your
used
question, I
to
just wanna-
justify that.
Okay, so there was also a groundwater sustainability plan that was done. Reggie, do you remember?
Yes.
What year that was adopted?
2022.
2022, okay.
Yeah.
So that is the newest information, that the valley has about groundwater sustainability. And so I don't have that graph here. We have shared it previously and we can get to you, but it shows based on the state's climate change models, that's why it looks out to 2070. It shows that over time, those models would project that the available groundwater in the valley would be declining due to changes in precipitation patterns. And, you know, demands in the valley don't increase significantly, right? I think the water use here is generally very efficient. And so even with growth, you know, the graph sort of shows those numbers, you know, the supply number from 2070 and the demand number getting close to each other, certainly never, you know, demand exceeding supply. But given uncertainty with the future, you know, we'd like to see a buffer there, right? And so that's what, you know, the 500 acre feet for groundwater recharge provides an additional buffer. Even the groundwater sustainability plan, it doesn't say that, you know, the groundwater is drastically overdrafted or that, you know, you're gonna run out, but in that 2070 timeframe, you know, they do start to converge. And so that's where we're just trying to look ahead and provide more of a buffer so that those numbers aren't getting close, because there is uncertainty in both and they could change at a different rate. And so this water source helps to provide that. So I think it's still accurate that, you know, the groundwater basin right now is looking pretty good. You're not overdrafted. There's, you know, more supply than demand. But looking out into the future, it gets a little closer. It doesn't look like a dire situation, but
And while that's an educated guess, it's still a guess.
correct. Yeah, the climate change models are a series of sophisticated.
And I say that
Yes.
because when I was in college, the big deal was the coming ice age. A few years later, now it's the other way around.
Yeah.
The Anasazi, the Hopi Indians, they lived in a very challenging environment, yet they survived. Then they finally had to leave, and I'm seeing sometimes projections of 30-year droughts. So to look at this and project that the lake can be kept somewhat fuller over the long run is educated speculation.
Yeah, the future projections that were done as part of our analysis, which I believe are attached to the EIR, and these are looking back historically and saying, if history repeats itself, which is a pretty common way of looking at hydrology because we don't know what will happen in the future. But that's one scenario, right?
We won't know the future until it's past.
Exactly,
Right.
but this is the past, and so if this were to recur, you know, this is what would happen. The model that our limnologist on the project, Dr. Anderson, did for the lake actually looked at, I think he did 99 different potential future scenarios and did a statistical analysis to see, well, what would the range, right? Because that's really all you can do when you're looking at the future is look at a potential range of scenarios. And so looked at, you know, what if it's wetter or if it's drier or if it's average. And so all of our analysis has those wet, dry, average scenarios in it. I don't present those here to you because like you say, they're projections and we can't say which one of them is true. But if it's on the drier side, then, you know, it's more important and there are more benefits. If it's on the wetter side, we just don't know, right? So,
Well,
yeah.
and when you look at this historically, and Mr. Trentman brings up the foresight of the people who built the dam in the first place.
Mhm.
Okay. We had at one time the largest single arch dam in the world, built by 100 little Italian stonemasons. They drained it the first 3 years. And that's why they came up with the multi-arch eastward design to replace it. This lake was never designed to be a recreational lake. It was intended to be a reservoir to irrigate the orange groves. So obviously you're going to see ups and downs because they built it because they had ups and downs for their own wells. They needed a water source. I understand that. But it seems that this has been promoted to do more than it's capable of doing. I appreciate what the studies have shown, what people are doing. But I sometimes think that these chapters are written by individual groups that each have their table full of documents because they repeat themselves. And so I also see numerous errors that tell me these people don't know Big Bear. They are dealing with a table of faceless stats. And they are processing it according to industry standards that said, well, you can assume this will happen. And just have to come back to, are we getting an equitable portion? Is everyone paying their fair share? You have mentioned other sources to pay for this, but I'm not seeing anyone rush forward with a handful of cash. So it's a case of, you can speculate, you can theorize that somebody's going to help us pay for this, but ultimately the entire cost of the project will be borne by property owners. Somebody has to pay for it. And so the people who may rent their house and be able to write the taxes off to a degree, it comes back to the people here and those people who would, according to the attorney, ultimately, some of those would be allowed to vote. They have to choose to be registered here to vote. It just, I'm trying to keep track of all the moving parts, and that's why I say it's like a shell game, trying to keep track of which shell he is under.
Yeah,
And how to interpret it.
yeah, and I think of this less as a shell game, as more a very complex project. Right, and it's a very complex project and a very, the issues outside of Barwa's process and disposal of water gets more complex as you get outside of that. You know, for, you know, my board here, disposing of the water is pretty simple. I dispose it into the CERN, I dispose it in the lake. I'm trying to keep it as simple as possible. The other pieces, MWD, CSD, pumping it up, you know, aquifers, those are benefits and opportunities that the project will produce. But, you know, as just as your GM or Barwa, I'm trying to keep it as simple as possible with regard to this project disposing water at, and, you know, finding a location. Again, CSD, the city could choose, and county could choose what they want to do with their product water if they choose to do something differently with it, but I'm looking for a place to dispose of it.
And the cost and the details are above and beyond what has, in fact, hasn't even been confirmed yet, but that's what we're talking about, building and financing.
We are talking about building and financing a project that allows us to dispose of the water into the lake. The permit guidelines that they gave us, we are designing to that, confirming it with the pilot, right? That's what we can do. And designing to that. And, you know, that's the best we can do at this point is take those permit guidelines and design a system to dispose of the lake. Like I said, I still think there would be, you know, you would have similar guidelines if you went up and then tried to spread this water, you would have similar guidelines. There may be a little bit of reduction in the amount of RO, or I don't know, to name it a better.
Yeah, actually, yeah, it would still have to be purified water. You would still need the same treatment process to use it for groundwater recharge at any location. Regardless of whether it's Sand Canyon or Van Dusen or Green Spot, they all require purified water. So the treatment process would be the same. And that is the majority of the program cost.
But the estimated cost, because we still don't know all the details,
Right on.
only takes it to division. All the rest hasn't even been reached yet.
That's right. All those other details, those other, the cost to,
Easements, construction, design, engineering, all of that.
well, I mean, to take it to division, that's in our estimate already.
From there to a DWP well at the end of Sand Canyon, once it becomes usable water again.
Well, I mean, he already has a well, but yes, all those other pieces, you're right. You know, there are estimates for those pieces that, you know, that Reggie has prepared and I think we've actually seen them before. We've done estimates on those pieces and Elaine and Reggie have, and those are things that have to be.
Those are done on your Zoom meetings?
The estimate for the Sand Canyon portion, is about $3 million that I believe is posted on the Replenish Paper website as well. It's just a matter of, you know, that's not the part that FAR was funding. So it's always talked about as part of the program and we've always talked about the entire cost, you know, prior to this, but then once it came down to how it was being funded, that's when, you know, we sort of broke those costs out separately for what FAR would fund versus what other partners would have.
We're not
Because we do have those cost estimates.
And the 3 million was based on putting the booster station up by the existing Bear Mountain ponds. But after conversations with the resorts and finding out that they're going to relocate their snowmaking line from Clubview, because it has so many bends, it's not economical to line it and run it through the golf course right by one of our existing Sand Canyon well, which happens to be one of the wells that will pump this percolated water out of the groundwater basin. But that cuts a significant cost, and that's why I estimate to build the booster, which will be part of our well building project, so that the cost will be reduced for the booster because we're combining 2 sites. And we're shortening the pipeline. We only have to run up Sand Canyon. We don't have to come down from the pond. It cuts about a mile of pipeline. And the pipe before was going to require easements. The new pipe does not. It will run in existing streets and discharge at a point, whether it's above or below Teton along Sand Canyon. We have to determine that and through testing. Even if the resorts decided, hey, we don't want to use our line. I just talked to Wade again last week, and absolutely, it's not a problem because they use it all the time anyway. And they are.
But we don't have that in writing.
We don't have it in writing, but I have a high degree of confidence. But if we don't, the distance from the Sand Canyon well where we're going to build the booster to the lake is not 7 miles. I'm not sure where person came up with, is 2.5 miles. And we can go in existing city streets for the most part, to get that pipeline. But I haven't done an extensive study because I don't think we're gonna have to do that.
And if that was done under your tiered EIRs, that would piggyback on the existing one?
Yes, that's correct. Just to say where the 7 miles may have come from was that the EIR analyzed a total of 7 miles of pipeline. And that includes replacing a pipeline to go to Shade Pond. So that's where that figure came from. It doesn't include, it doesn't include Sand Canyon as being 7 miles. I just wanted to add that.
Okay, I always wondered where the.
Yeah.
And it was mentioned the pipeline up to the top of the summit, and I'm going. So,
Right.
But it's more moving parts.
Oh, yeah, I mean, definitely not, I'll just say it, not moving parts for me.
Yeah.
Right, because again, I'm not legally allowed to do anything but disposal of water. That's the charge, that's the guidelines that.
But without these other projects, that's all you can do is dump the water in the Stanfield Marsh. It can never get to your well. It can never get back in the, well, some of it would hopefully trickle down into the aquifer.
I mean, the project partners have been around, been part of the project since the very beginning, and they have consistently contributed towards the project, consistently.
Who are you talking about now?
CSD, DWP, and MWD have consistently, and Barwa have consistently, we all total, we agreed on $2.4 million to start this whole process. Every agency put in $600,000 towards this project to get it to a point where we could go out and look for grants, and we've received many grants now. I mean, don't take this lightly, $18 million in grants does not come every day. That's a huge undertaking to get that level of grants, and another 9 million out there. We're really, I mean, this is huge. Having the benefit of being able to have contribution from the state and the feds to contribute towards a project is huge. Doesn't happen.
And the first 2 years, the project, which didn't include putting it in the lake, it was ultimately determined it wasn't economically feasible because you could only use the water to irrigate the ballparks and percolate in Green Spot and Sand Canyon 6 months out of the year. So the other 6 months, you have to discharge back outside of the valley. So you'd only get the benefit of 1,000 acre feet, not 2,000 acre feet.
And not to mention, we get more flow during the winter, which is the other issue behind it.
But you mentioned 2,000 acre feet, maybe 2,200 ultimately.
Ultimately.
Would that cover a wet year?
I mean, so we do 788 million gallons is our dry weather year. I'd have to look back at the general manager's report to see the last time we got above that. I don't think we've hit above that in a while, but consistently we're hitting about 2 million gallons a day on average. And we're doing about 2,000 acre feet every year. I think we look back at 10 years, 10 years worth of data and that's pretty consistent.
Well, where I'm headed with it is if we could have our permit lifted at any time for the outfall line, then you wouldn't have anywhere to put the excess years anyway.
They have to give us
and
time to adopt. They have to give us time to adopt, to do it like a change in project. So they would have to give us, we would probably get like a 5-year time to adopt, unless there was something specific that was something an immediate, like oh, you've got this contaminant in there and you have to treat that right away, that might be different, but at this point, you know, the way that would happen is more of, they would change our permit and give us time to adapt to that whole piece.
When you talked about 18 million in grants,
Yes,
we only have 25%.
up to 25%, that's correct.
Okay,
Federal,
and you can't get state grants that come from federal money.
that's correct.
So I'm back to the idea of, we might be able to get some money from a state that's $73 billion in debt. And you had talked about ultimately Fish and Game, Army Corps of Engineers, Visit Big Bear, Chamber of Commerce, maybe even the county. But we haven't seen any of that money.
Right.
So the only thing we can rely on right now is that the taxpayers, the property owners will end up having to foot that, let's say 64 million, so I'll take off your 22 million contingency.
Thank you.
But also mindful that the initial presentation on this said it was gonna be 44 million. Yeah, things change, and so that money still has to come from somewhere, and it's gonna come out of the pockets of the taxpayers. And if it sounds like a good idea, I'm concerned that it only sounds like a good idea. We can't prove that it's a good idea because we really don't know all the details. But we're gonna go out and borrow money for the part that you are responsible for.
And I'll just say to you is, you're right. It is on our ratepayers right now.
Which is why it should have gone to a vote.
Well, I mean, and again, that was a choice that the board made.
Well, it was
So
the wrong
you-
choice.
Well, again, that's something you.
I mean, I saw a presentation that you gave in September of 22 at a function. It
Okay,
was a PowerPoint presentation,
okay,
and it was 44 million. You talked about grants, you talked a lot about the ski resort paying. And, you know, stakeholders, never did you say the taxpayers were gonna pay for it, never, which I realize you've made it clear that's not your problem because you only have 3 customers. So it never did you tell people that it was gonna be on your property taxes.
and I'd have to look back, unfortunately, I'd have to look back at that presentation to speak to it directly. And I don't,
I mean, I walked away from it going, hey, great, this is a great project.
and I don't
We're gonna have water."
recall the exact presentation you're talking about. But it's not uncommon for me to mention the grants and mention the rate structure, you know, how it's gonna get paid for with rate structure. There was also some discussion at that time. There was a discussion, I sat down personally with the ski resorts. At that time, they were interested in the water at that point. I had sat down with NWD at that point, and they were interested in the water at that point. CSD, DWP, they were interested in the water. Again, I am trying to present the best information possible at the time, and every time I do that, I try and present the best information possible. I've got no reason to do anything else but to present the best information possible. We're still doing that today.
Well, I mean, what's out in town is that it's gonna keep the lake full. I haven't talked to one person yet. I was at a meeting again today where I polled the whole room. And, you know, nobody knows they're paying for it. I haven't had one person say, yeah, I saw it. Apparently they don't notice, you know. when
Well,
the taxes go up.
I don't know how you deal with that, like this, you know, that.
Well, people would have realized it if it had been put to a vote, like, is this something I want to pay for? You know, the hospital is gonna be putting it to a vote. Do you want to build a new hospital? Yes or no?
Right, and again,
And this is gonna cost more than the hospital is
right,
gonna.
and again, if the board chose to do that, right, if they directed me to do that, I definitely would have done that, right? They directed me to do something different. So
Well, I think
would-
that, I think with the board, some board members not choosing that one of the 4 boxes that you showed us where there are options. Somebody, I was told, Mr. Green made the comment, oh, that's not the route we want to go then, is informing the people. That was not the right decision.
Well, I mean, again, I can't, you know, that's a board's decision, not mine, right? I am, you know, I work for them, the board, and the board says, do this, I do this. And so the board chose to go this route. Unfortunately, I know you're not happy with that, and I don't, you know, there may be some others that are not happy with that decision, but they did choose that. And it's not something, you know, me personally, I did, or it was the board's decision. They were presented with information and they made the decision, and that was up to them. If the board chooses to do something different now, that's again up to the board. I'm happy to do whatever the board gives me direction to do. Happy to take that up. 100%. So I totally understand. Again, you know, I don't know, you know, what went, you know, as far as Mr. Green, I can't, you know, speak for him verbatim exactly what he said or any of the other board members at the time. You know, I just know what the board decision was at the time. I hope that helps.
The attorney bowed out.
He did.
Do we have some kind of a guesstimate on when he'll be able to answer the questions that we dropped in his lap?
He has a call into the register of voters already a few days ago, and she's waiting for them to call back, and he's following back up today.
Okay, because Mr. Herrick's comments here was that the city to do a similar,
A special election.
well,
That's for
He was-
200,000.
he was talking about polling. He said it was $500,000 or 250,000 for them. So with the two agencies, 500,000. Well, unless I heard the wrong digits, I thought he said more like 8 to 10,000. Your attorney.
Yeah, and I again,
I'm not,
yeah.
but it's like.
I
that's a
don't
big
know,
difference.
there's a big difference, right? Like, I think the 250 that was quoted in the past, I think that was for a special election to go out just for the project. And I don't know if it was just for a advisory vote, or it was for like a,
Measure I.
you know, like a measure or a, community service facility, right? So I'm not sure which one it was for, or if he was just talking plain and simple about it, you know, like, oh, hey, if we're getting on the November ballot, because that was the other thing that he did mention. I don't know if you remember that, but he was saying that if there's a lot of stuff on the ballot, it makes it cheaper. It saves a lot of money. And so maybe that's what he's kind of saying, oh, hey, it could be 10
He
grand.
said to get on the June ballot is more expensive than November.
Yeah.
November has more stuff.
Because November has more stuff. So the spread, again, if the board chooses to go that route and they wanna, you know, put that advisory vote down or, you know, however they choose to move forward on that, I'm happy to go that route. So, I mean.
I can also touch base with him and make sure when we get those options, he can provide estimates with those as well.
What do you see happening, like this rate, this chart of the
Yeah.
fees? What do you see happening with the Replenish Big Bear fees after fiscal year 2028? Like, is it gonna go down? The cost gonna go down for people? Is it gonna remain the same? It's about, you know, I think it's, see, for Big Bear Lake, it's $301
Right.
on your property taxes for Replenish Big Bear. Do you see that staying the same?
Well, I mean, again, there's a lot of variables in that, but right now, if you ask me today, I would say that's gonna stay the same. It's not gonna change, right? So that's the best information. I'm not gonna tell you, well, if I get more grants, obviously that number comes down, right?
Right, but I mean, it's not, the people are gonna have to continue to pay. For the project.
For 30 years, yes. For 30 years, they have to pay, that bill has to be paid off. But again, there's more grants, then that number comes down, right? I mean, $9 million will make a huge hit on, right? If we already looked at 430,000 was about $17. So if you can think of like what $500,000 would impact that rate structure, it would be huge, right? So we got another 9 million, that's gonna be a big deal. But again, we're gonna, you know, we're going through this whole process. I mean, we have, you know,
I mean, obviously, we're already talking about funding right now. We go through this whole process and we get to this basis of design validation part where it takes what we learned in the pilot, applied it to, what we learned in the pilot and applied it to an actual design, that WSC can then take it, back to us with a revised cost estimate and give you revised numbers. I think you were talking about summertime,
Yeah.
summertime, to give you that additional information. That might provide you a new, waypoint, for lack of a better word, a waypoint to say, okay, well, we went from here to here. And by then we might know about the other grant, hopefully, and then we'll have that piece. And so, we gotta start taking away at this, or make different decisions, right? That's all that has to happen.
I mean, one of the speakers last week, Matt Scriven, it sounded like he really didn't understand the project as well as he did after he listened. So it sounded like his speech changed a little bit. Was there ever any thought to people who really are the stakeholders, the businesses, the people that live on the lake should be the people that are, kicking in on this thing? Some people can't even see the lake that are paying for this.
I mean, I don't really have like a method, as borrower, we don't have a method to really do that. We can apply a rate structure, to all of our, to our 3 customers, but then to all of your customer base, we can pass on a rate structure that does that. If the city wanted to, if you're talking about the city specifically, about people around the lakes, I might suggest that you look at like an opportunity to maybe look at your collection and maybe do something through your collection rate structure. And then,
Proximity benefit.
something that you could do something different on your collection side as opposed to the treatment side. And then be able to apply that, to the collection side or something like that. I mean, it's up to, it would be up to you and the city manager to decide on what you guys wanted to look at. And I would leave that to you guys to decide if you wanted to do something like that. We can only apply like a straight, well, for us, it's.
I mean, because to me, it kind of sounds like a lake recreation project. I was disappointed today to hear that 3/4 of the water is going in the lake and only 1/4 of the water is going into the aquifers. I was pinning more of my hopes on, the aquifer part of it.
Well, and then again, that's still an option for the board to discuss and decide to do that. If they wanna do that, they wanna choose to do a different project that gives them more control over the water and decides where they wanna do with it. I mean, I'm fine with that. I mean, whatever the board decides to do. I can, I'll leave the valve open for you. You know what I mean? I can help with that part after that.
And I know from last week's meeting that, it kind of went around that they were poo-pooing the comment that was made about the lake being clay at the bottom. Well, I've lived here almost 30 years, and I remember when they were dredging out the lake, and my husband and I were so surprised that once they got down like 30 feet, like literally the clay was dry. So that lake, it's not gonna soak down into our.
Yeah, I mean, that's an NW question to answer. But I know like Stanfield Marsh is pretty much, there's just like Baldwin Lake, there's clay layers. Once you get to a clay layer, it pretty much, stops. It is a perched water, and that's the way it stays. I don't know, anybody else that know, now I'm gonna ask you.
I don't know.
Yeah, it would have to be, something that Brittany would answer while there was any kind of, recharge of aquifers from the lake. My understanding, I don't believe so. So,
It is addressed in the EIR. We had that question at one of the scoping meetings, and I believe, that the mutual or the lake people were there to discuss, and they answered that question that you can't, there isn't any recharge that's happening from the lake. But I think the the reason why there's that amount of water going to the lake is that the actual water needs of the community are not 2,000 acre feet at this point, right? Reggie can speak to that.
500 acre feet of additional water, into the aquifer. Well, and I can talk to you in private, my simple math of getting to this extends the water supply approximately 65 years. So instead of the lines almost intersecting in 2070, it would be 21 and change
Well, so
whatever
it sounds like the
matters.
aquifer part of the project is good.
Yes.
It's the lake part of the project that, you know, it's hard to argue with somebody that can't see the lake. That benefits them.
There's, yeah, the lake, yeah, it's everybody's point of view.
Yeah, I mean, there is, I mean, and we've talked lots of times, about the aesthetics, more people coming up. I mean, we've talked about all of those things when it comes to this lake. There's a, correlation between the number of people that, when the lake is full, more people come up and visit the lake. That's just the way.
Which helps the businesses
It does help the
and whatnot
business.
that potentially should be paying extra money for the water being in the lake.
Sure, and again,
Visit Big Bear.
right, I mean, again, I don't have a mechanism to do that kind of stuff. That would be, that would be up to the city and CSD to have that discussion, as far as like those kind of, I don't have those kind of mechanisms. I would, defer to the city manager and let him, figure out exactly how that works. So. Hopefully,
Simple numbers for the water use. If it's 2,000 acre feet, according to state stats recently, that pencils out to about 16 to 22,000 people. So that's almost our entire permanent population. And my other question would be, you're talking about another 9 million in grants.
yes,
If you already have 18,
yes. 5 of it is state.
oh, okay, because 18,
I
18, 36,
already
72.
had you.
So we're still eligible for that?
We are still eligible for $9 million in grants.
Federal?
Federal. Okay. That's Title 16 that we've already applied for. And that's a federal grant, Bureau of Reclamation.
Because I know at one point, Overnolte and,
Idea?
thank you, we're both looking at 2.5 million and going, wait a minute, you can't both do it, that's gonna blow us out.
Well, we got $1 million of that. From both of them, I guess it came down to $1 million total. From both
Instead of 5.
Instead of 5. Hey, you know what I mean? We'll take $1 million. Every $1 million, please down. So anyways, so I don't know if you want to have any further discussion about funding, but that's, we kind of talked a little bit about that funding portion.
Is the advisory vote funding?
The advisory vote is not funding because, right, it would be a cost to the advisory vote, but the part is like.
If the advisory vote kills your project, it's kind of critical to funding, isn't it?
The advisory, well, again, it's an advisory vote. It's up to the board to adopt that and say, yes, we're going to do this. What it says in the advisory vote,
Or not?
or not,
Okay.
because it is an advisory vote.
So we would know perhaps within a week what it might cost and what we could possibly do in terms of advisory.
Let's follow up with Jim, to get those, I would hope to have something, by April, your April meeting. If not, it would come to you in May, unless you want something, a special meeting just to discuss that piece, we can do that.
Part of that would also be how many people you're gonna ask? Is it everybody or just, you talked about a population
Well,
of
that-
3,500?
And that was an advisory vote, that was a poll, people talked about a poll,
And
that can be done quicker,
remember Dr. Harris,
yes?
somebody said once, well, how hard can it be? You just develop this questionnaire, and she got her back up very quickly, having worked for her PhD. Phrasing the questions and the marketing of it is critical to what the answers are going to be.
Right. And
That would be part of it.
and obviously they're, like, so am I hearing you that that's a poll as opposed to advisory vote?
I thought he was gonna come back with the options that would be,
Okay, and so we can bring those options back, and we can figure out either April special meeting to discuss that specific thing, or May and have a discussion at that point. Is
Yeah, I
that-
mean, I think we just need to be brutally honest with people and tell them how much it's gonna cost them.
Right, oh, I think,
well, and what they're.
I think it's, I think it's been pretty brutally put out there at this point.
I disagree.
Yeah,
I
okay,
just disagree. And I looked at your list of all the places whoever went and talked to the kids at the middle school. And I just think about the thing that I saw where it never told me I was gonna be paying for it.
Yeah.
So that's why I think people don't realize they're paying for it.
yeah, and I don't know, like, I didn't see specific, I don't recall, because I know
Director.
you have to.
So for transparency reasons, those should be given to Bridget, that way they can be given to the rest of the board and the public.
I'll note that I did respond to the first two. I'm trying to stay within the lines.
I'm sorry, I lost myself.
I had one question too about all these extra solar panels that you want to put in.
Okay,
So that property's not your property.
it's owned by
right?
CSD.
And,
No, he does not have the agreement.
I don't have an agreement.
okay,
I only have, all I did was ask CSD if I can include that in our survey. Because I've had, a few different discussions with CSD about either lease, purchase that property. And they were, at the time, they were open to the solar panels on that property.
and like how many solar panels is it? Is it as many?
It's 2 acres of solar panels, that's what I need to generate.
So your project needs that. You can't not do that.
I can not do that, but again, I'm looking for the most cost-effective method.
Well, I know, but I mean, at a certain point, I realize, you live on a street where there's, Barway here.
Yeah.
But I mean, at a certain point, it's like you're ruining the neighborhood. I just feel like really it's unfair.
Right, well, and I understand that, that feedback, and again, I'm like, just to, like, the quick analysis that I did. By putting the solar panels in, it saves $675,000 a year in power. You tell me, you don't wanna spend that, you don't wanna put the solar in, and you wanna spend $675,000.
I know, I just
I
feel
mean,
like it's a
it's
little,
just
it's
hard to-
like,
It's hard to justify not doing that. Now, we're gonna explore every opportunity that we can to do on site, and I've already explained to the two gentlemen that complained about the solar panels, that we're gonna explore every other opportunity, and I actually have another opportunity to present to the board at some point. But we're gonna explore every opportunity of the existing structures and existing locations that we have on site. Because, I mean, let's put it this way, Barra, like our facility out there. I mean, there are people that might find it beautiful. Me personally, I'll leave that
I
much.
mean, the first time I saw it, I actually thought it looked nice. It could be a library. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about the odor, but the library part, sure. I'm just saying, there's opportunities out there.
And then I keep driving by, the solar panels that are over there by on Division, and I'm
Yeah.
trying to figure out why these are so ugly. And that, you drive by it and like, I know they're there, but I mean.
Yeah, well, I mean, so I have a PPA, he owns his.
Mhm.
He was required by the city to beautify the piece, or wanted to beautify the front. Whatever, this.
When I told the city what my proposal was, they were concerned that that's one of the main entrances into the city. They said, make it look pretty.
As opposed to City Hall with all those panels.
Just did what I was asked.
I think the ones in City Hall are beautiful too, I put them in.
So, I mean,
Yeah, those actually don't bother me.
Right.
On
They're on the
parking structure.
parking structure.
right, I put them on the parking structure so they don't show up as much.
Right,
And I put some on the Public Works building and then out here, this was a little bit different. This was a PPA, and again, the
what's a PPA?
power purchase agreement. So GE, the parent company,
Pay less than if we bought it from Bear Valley Electric.
right, so, I pay, I think it's like 7.3 cents per kilowatt hour. And then plus, I have to buy some back from, Bear Valley Electric as I put it in.
You told me at one point it was 11 cents a kilowatt versus 14 cents.
No, it's
not
11,
free, but
it's 11, right now it's probably 11 or 12 cents per kilowatt. As opposed to, oh, no, it's like 28 cents a kilowatt to buy it from Bear Valley Electric. So you're talking about, I mean, the difference is, you know, I think last time I looked at it, it's like $450,000 savings.
Yeah, it's ugly.
Yeah, it's ugly, but it saves $450,000 a year to our ratepayers. It's a big deal to put it in. I mean, again, we're beating a dead horse with
Have we reached consensus on, you'd like to hear more about the feedback?
the voter.
Thank you. Advisory.
I mean,
That's a very least.
I actually don't see any reason why it can't just be on the ballot in November and it's a binding vote.
Well, so we'll bring that back to the board for full discussion, right? So,
And who would write the ballot?
Jim, and they have professional staff that words things correctly.
So you're not answering yes to a no question and things like that?
Yeah, right. I mean, I don't think that's that's not productive, right? That's not the right thing to do, is you want to make sure that you do the right thing and you ask the right questions, and again, they have professional people, that's it. Given that recommendation to the board and then letting them just have a discussion, whether it's a poll or a vote. You know, you guys can decide as a team, to give me direction to do whatever you guys choose to do, and we'll follow that. And that's fine. I'm happy to do that and this is, like I said, when Jim comes back with that. So we'll have both of those options, you know. There's a three.
Whatever he comes up with.
Because he talked about three options.
So we'll have to discuss all three and come up with those.
To me, it's very critical that we don't say, do you want to have water for Bambi or do you want to grow alfalfa? Somehow that's kind of not what I want to see.
So it needs to be
Okay.
honest.
Well,
You don't want water
Honest
to
is
drain
relative.
or water for alfalfa, no?
yeah.
No, well, yeah, the description gets approved by the board and that goes out and all that kind of stuff. And so we'll do that. Let's see. As far as the EIR, do you have any concerns about taking this forward to the board? For adoption or for certification? Let the attorney tell me the right words to say, certification in April.
I mean, I need to spend some time with the EIR.
Oh, yes, for sure. Set a lot of time aside. Well, you're saying you don't know, so you can't make an educated and informed decision, right? I ran across things in reading that I went, wait a minute, I could have sworn they said something else in a previous chapter. And I need to go back, so I'm reading it again.
So we need EIR for dummies.
Okay,
Cliff notes.
well,
I didn't say it, Larry.
we don't have.
I was trying to be
an
funny.
open Period for response anymore, right? That ended February 25th.
Yes, but obviously essentially the period for public comment never really ends until the board hearing occurs. So obviously the board will take into consideration the comments received at the public hearing, as well as the responses to comments that we've prepared, which are not public yet, because they're still in draft form, but they're nearly there.
But if you're gonna read 1,000 pages, or 1,400, or 4,600,
Yeah, you
you
choose.
gotta get it done in 5 days.
And again, it is no light matter, so don't feel bad because it's
Well,
a
but I
long.
appreciate that she's saying she needs.
Oh, no, yeah.
to-
I mean, personally, I just feel like on the board that there's still more questions than answers, so I don't know if you would get an approval of the thing you're looking.
Yeah, certification.
Yeah,
Yeah. And so would you rather see this go forward in May?
maybe, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, there's a lot of things swirling around right now, right?
Sure, well, we got a lot of sport playing around.
When does the budget approval, is that done?
We did that.
You're done deal.
So we did that. So we did that and that's done. And so we would push this to May and then the second one would either, yes, so yeah.
Or tentatively said you had 6 months
For funding,
before the loan vaporizes?
yeah, before we're,
No, I think
No.
it's when he runs out of money.
I ran out of money.
Okay, but when you say, somebody asked me that,
Yeah,
I told them my answer, which could be
Sure.
wrong. When you say you run out of money, you don't mean you run out of money to run the sewer plant, you run out of money for the project,
right, I'm not spending sewer plant money
okay?
to fund the project. I would not do that, right? That's not responsible and that's my job is to be responsible. Right?
Fiscally responsible.
Fiscally responsible, that's my job is to be fiscally responsible, so I would not do that.
I just wanna make sure.
So November is when I run out of, actually run out of money, last dollar,
Replenishment.
replenish money.
Okay.
And then, so September would be the goal to have that, loan in place to move forward. So that way in November, because it takes about 3 months to start drawing money.
But the attorney said for the November election, which is too late,
Right.
the drop, it was August. So if we keep pushing this April, May, June, July,
August.
there's a problem.
And then at that point, we're gonna have to have that discussion whether it would be, so end of November, I would run out of money. We may have to pause at that point and say, okay, we're not doing any more work on this project until.
You're allowed to pause for the funding.
I would have to pause for funding.
Well,
I would
thought you
have
said
to
that
pause.
that's a potential that we wouldn't necessarily lose it.
No, I'm talking about contracts with
I'm looking at
consultants.
the big bucks.
Not the big bucks on the, if the EIR was adopted and done, and then we could, the NEPA was finished, we might be able to start drawing on some money that we can't draw on right now, right? That's the other issue that we're dealing with. Because we can't draw on Title 16.
Do you know what NEPA
Yeah.
means?
That's the,
I know.
that's
I'm wondering, oh, yeah.
yes, it's the federal version of sequel.
The federal version of SECRA, so I can't draw on that money until that portion is complete. The NEPA is complete, so there's no way to draw on that grant funding.
And I thought you said your pilot program
Yes,
was done,
it is.
and I thought done meant approved. And yet in your last board packet, there was discussion there about it's almost complete,
No, all the equipment's gone,
right?
done,
But
but there's a report.
has Santa Ana and the state and everybody else said?
No, there's a report that has to be generated from that whole pilot study. Right, so WSC is developing a report from the pilot study to show the Santa Ana Regional Board that we can do what we said we could do, for permit guideline purposes.
And NEPA is critical because your lending agency wants certain numbers that are generated in the NEPA, right?
The NEPA is for the lending agency and for the granting agency.
So we have approved a budget that tells them what we intend to do, that'll make them happy.
Yes,
You do not have all the NEPA numbers,
I don't have a complete NEPA, no, I do not.
so we do not have the official blessing of.
Do I need secret before I get NEPA?
No.
Oh,
You
Well,
want to
speak it shorthand here.
I'm sorry, yeah.
Nika Sequel.
So the CEQA NEPA process could go in parallel. So the EPA is now working on the NEPA process. So they're doing their review and are coordinating with us to get all the information needed. You need to get NEPA completed in order to go with the loan. So that is one of the critical items to get that approved before Wawa can sign and approve the loan.
But the important thing is the CEQA EIR needs to be certified prior to any formal NEPA approvals. So it goes CEQA, then NEPA, but we have been working on the WIPIA loan, all of those components in parallel. And I would say that the environmental for WIPIA is relative, I mean, it's mostly done on my part. So we made a lot of headway in that regard.
Well, if the board did not certify it, then NEPA's in jeopardy.
The grants are in
Correct.
jeopardy.
Yeah.
Yeah, the grants are in jeopardy, NEPA's in jeopardy.
But keep in
And if
mind,
the board won't approve or certify or the proper term,
You might as well just.
Doesn't
quit.
matter.
You might as well just quit then. Right, I mean, that's the reality is,
each one dominoes to the next.
right,
Yes, I
you,
understand that.
I mean, these things have to be approved, right? Otherwise, the project just ends. That's the fact. It
well,
just-
I was just gonna mention the CEQA process isn't an approval of the funding of the project. It's the
Oh, right.
approval of, it doesn't require you to implement the project. So that's,
But you can't get the funding unless.
Correct.
You can't get the
Correct.
names unless you get the CEQA.
yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
Did you have more that you wanted to?
no, I just still, I mean, we don't have to,
I think we talked about the EIR.
Yeah.
Certification based design.
base of the design, the final design obviously is gonna take the basis of design, which is the next step, and after we get the piloting information to go to the basis of the design, and that will be the final design and the bid advertisement and the construction portion, so I'm looking forward.
And the feds won't allow you to create a project and put it out to bid. It must be babysat every day.
The feds, I mean, there's a bunch of federal guidelines. So like, anytime I have any kind of federal, either grants or loans on it, there are federal guidelines for me putting out a bid, that there are things that we have to put in our bid documents and federal numbers that we have to put on our, plans.
But the bid advertisement is not related to a turnkey project.
It depends on how the board chooses to bid the project, right? We could do it in a couple different ways. There are long lead items that in the past, we've talked about bidding out long lead items. And then, and like packages like the RO, for instance, or the monitoring wells, the pipeline that goes from here to Stanfield. Those are items that we can bid out separately. And then, bidding, why the other portion of the project is continuing to be designed and finished up for bidding purposes.
And they are able to design once the previous step is done, or are they trying to do it concurrently?
Well, basically, the final design has been awarded to WSC already, right? We did that in December.
Final, or the global project?
The final design of this project.
But does it say how many reverse osmosis cylinders, how many UV lights, and what kind of microfiltration, and how it's gonna be set up?
That's what the final design will be.
That is not done yet. So the first step within the final design scope of work is what the scope calls the basis of design validation report. So as David mentioned, we're taking what we learned from testing certain equipment during the pilot. And saying, okay, is this exactly the equipment we would use, or would we need to modify something to change the water quality outcome? And so that step that we're working on now, we'll have that done probably by about the end of summer, where we've confirmed that, okay, this is the treatment process that is going to be able to meet what the permit limitations will be. And along with that comes any updates to the cost that might need to be made as well. So that's the first step that's in the final design scope. And then once those decisions are made about what the treatment equipment is, then you move into the phase where you're doing specifications for number of RO units and, UV pumps, those sorts of things. Did that answer your question?
Well, it sounds as though even the first step is not gelled yet to get the water to division. Because you don't know what you're gonna build, and you don't know who's going to build it, and the technical specs.
Well, I mean, none of that, right, I mean, you just awarded the contract. In December, you just awarded the
But we
contract.
don't know all these stages yet. We know it could cost 64 million or
I
72
mean, that's,
million.
I mean, again, that's based on the best information that we have at this time. We have a general idea based on lots of years of experience doing these types of projects. What the basic structure of the design is going to take, and that's the basis that you have on, in March of 23, that's what the engineering estimate was based off of.
And you made the analogy when we were talking about the MOU intent.
Letter of intent, yeah.
That was showing income because you couldn't go to the bank and ask for a loan and say, well, I think in 10 years I'm gonna be making X number of dollars. Well, at this rate, that's kind of what we're doing. I would not hire a contractor to build my house if he couldn't tell me how much it's gonna cost.
Well, and to get those numbers exactly what it's gonna cost you, I need to finish the final design.
Okay.
Right, I have to spend the money, so that way I can put together a bid package that can go out to bid and give you a number that says, Larry, here's your number, and,
Today.
well, no, I mean, that's, I mean, what you bid.
in contingencies.
Right, I put in contingency, we typically add like a 10% contingency into that number, right? And then I take it to the board, and the board awards a contract. And that contract, then we tell him, give him a notice to proceed, and he goes and builds his facility, he goes and builds our facility.
Builds or designs.
Builds, they're designing.
Because I thought, you had said you would have to babysit every day because you couldn't just farm it out.
No, I mean, you don't. We give a contractor a contract, right? Through that whole process, there's an enormous support structure that supports that contractor to make sure that it's built to our standards, and
But we are not handing a contractor this project and say, this is what I want built.
we are. But we then follow it up with construction management team, right? You have your representative, your construction management team. There is a support structure that supports all that, just like we did with the Headworks project, right? There's a whole construction management team that handled that project, right? And that's a $1.3 million project.
It took months.
And took months, most of that was due to missing parts that can't get delivered because of
Ships crashing into bridges.
yeah, supply chain issues and those kind of things. This would be a very similar kind of thing on a huge scale where, we're building a project,
Is that creating questions in your mind?
Yeah.
Any that you can share?
No.
That he can, soothe your.
No, I understand it's,
yeah, it's one of those, right, I mean, it's like big things are dependent on each other, right? That's the way this works, right? We start with a foundation and we build our building the way up, and that's what we're trying to do here is build our building the way up. Again, the board chooses to do it, or they don't choose to do it. I mean, that's, I don't have that power. You guys have that power to choose to move forward, just like the previous boards chose to move forward on the things that they chose to move forward on, That makes sense.
But it is a good thing to have new eyes always come in.
I'm sure David doesn't think so.
you know what, I appreciate everybody's perspective, I really do, honestly and truly, like, we have been moving along with this project for years, and you know, until now, you know, we've just been moving along just as I've been directed to, right? So, I mean, the board directs me to, I follow.
I mean,
And,
I can tell you from my perspective, being on council these last,
yeah,
you know,
13 months.
yeah, that, you know, these other things that I'm on, I go back, I report to them and I tell them, I have this concern, I have that concern, and I can tell you that our two members on city council that were reporting back did a terrible job of reporting back to us.
Yeah, and I would just, you know, my suggestion to you is you take that up with
Yeah,
the
no,
board members and the
yes.
city manager and,
Yeah,
you know,
the
get
city
that.
manager's already heard from me.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, you know, that's his, you know,
Yeah.
I can only,
And I mean, he's new too, right? I mean, he started just living
2 years?
for- I came on,
right, 2 years.
so. No, not quite 2 years.
Not quite 2 years.
No.
Year and a half, I'm just saying, is like, and that's, you know, Larry's been on our board for 2 years right now, and
Everybody has to be brought up to speed.
everybody, right, and, you know, that is an unfortunate part, right, because I'm now, like, you know, all of a sudden, I'm, you know, driving along and somebody stepped on the brake, and I'm like, oh, wait a minute, did a little bit of that, right, so, you know, and so I'm trying to get everybody up to speed and at least educated and make informed decisions about this process, because that's all I can do is give you those opportunities to make the best informed decision that you can, right? Because that's my job.
So I'll take the
Well,
EIR.
hopefully, you know, like,
Paper copy right over here for you.
Yeah, oh, yay.
you know, hopefully, I mean, again, we wanted to make sure that you had as much information as you could in this kind of a setting. It's a little bit more comfortable setting to ask questions and, you know, share some of your opinions and get some additional information that helps you make a good recommendation to the board as we move forward. I don't know, like I said, I already heard you about the EIR, you're thinking May timeframe, and then the advisory vote as soon as we can develop information for you. And then everything else.
And continue the discussion with other one.
Yeah, and you wanted to continue discussion of the program water equity.
Yes, thank you.
So we'll have that continue, and then you can decide again what you want to do with that. Like, again, you know, if you guys decide you want to do something else with the program water, I'll leave that up to you. Anything else? Hopefully,
Where do you read this?
You,
You aren't getting in here.
if you have space on your computer, download and then read it at your leisure.
Speechify. Speechify is great. Reads it to you.
Oh, okay.
It reads the whole document to you if you want. It's great. It's awesome. And it really is.
Books on trying to sleep.
Yeah.
No, I mean, it really is useful, just so that way you get there, the full thing. Anything else, anybody? We're in good shape? All right, hopefully this was productive for you guys and you felt
I mean, I've learned a lot today.
great,
This
awesome.
is one of
Yeah, I
three
mean,
meetings that I've gone
it's,
to.
this is an education process on speed, right? That's, I mean, you're.
Drinking from afar.
Yeah, you drinking from a fire hose. I like that. Yeah.
Are there gonna be more?
No, not today. That's